Alrighty, people, how are we doing? This is, of course, your boy Bernie here, along with Pete.
Oh, what's up, people?
And again, it's the start early. Again, I do apologize that the stream is a little bit late. Had something come up, and again, I do apologize to both the audience and Pete for that because that is on me. So again, I do apologize to everybody that this happened, but just like life, sometimes stuff happens. But again, I do appreciate Pete and of course you guys, the audience as well, for being patient and not at my neck right now, because I would probably be at my neck right now if I was a viewer. But nevertheless, Pete, we're here to discuss some things. Obviously some big things happened, and unfortunately we can't get too into it as of right now. But what we can do, and what I think we should do, is really talk about how the offseason went for all these teams, because right now we're getting close to that time where we're really looking at who has made the best moves so far, not only in the draft, not only in the offseason, not only with signing two-way players, but who's really made the best moves right now in terms of NBA teams for the offseason. Obviously, we still have a month away. Like I've talked about before with you, and I've talked about with Tyrese before, I really felt like that Rudy Gobert trade really froze the NBA trade market. Like, I just feel like a lot of people aren't trying to make moves currently just because they don't want to get stuck, paying so much. And obviously the Celtics are in that situation with the Kevin Durant rumors. But should we just get started with this tier list?
Let's do it, my guy. I'm ready.
All right, so let me just pause the music in the background. Again, do appreciate everybody tuning in. So here we go. Let's go to the live scene. Here we are. Boom. We have our tier list, S, A, B, C, and D. This is, of course, a tier list talking about what moves people have made and how it went for those teams. Obviously, there's a lot of things that we can talk about. And so, Pete, should we start with the A's? Should we go Atlanta Hawks? Should we go ATL?
Yeah, let's do it. Let's start with Atlanta.
All right, so really quick.
We'll let you get it going.
Yeah. So, for the people that are looking, this is the movement tracker for the Atlanta Hawks so far this offseason. Via free agency, they've gotten Aaron Holiday, Frank Kaminsky. Via trades, they have gotten Harkless, Holiday, and DeJounte Murray from the San Antonio Spurs. The draft, they got AJ Griffin and Tyrese Martin. They've obviously lost Sharif Cooper, Danilo Gallinari, Kevin Huerter, Landale, DeLon Wright. And again, I appreciate it, Mo. Appreciate it. And through free agency, they were able to get Gordon Dang, Kevin Knox, Timothy Luell, Carabao, and Skylar Mays, and Lou Will. Those guys are free agents from their roster. And so, Pete, if we had to look at kind of what they added, what they lost, and who are their free agents this coming season, how would you rate, in your opinion, the Atlanta Hawks on this tier maker?
Oh, man, this one's kind of tough. This is like one of the tougher teams, I think. I'd actually probably go ahead and give them like a B, maybe a B-.
Okay.
Personally. I really like the DeJounte Murray addition, personally.
Yeah.
I think they probably gave up a little too much, but what are you going to do? That's the NBA right now.
Mm-hmm.
You inherently have to give up a lot. And
Yeah.
DeJounte Murray, I've always been super high. You guys could go back, and I hate to self-plug myself. I mean, there's a video on this channel from probably 5 years ago when DeJounte Murray was like 18 still, and I was talking about this dude is next up. He's like, this guy has got all the skills long term to grow. And mind you, in that same video, I talked about Kelly Oubre and Gary Harris. So it's like, what are we going to do about those two? But that being said, right, I've heard a lot of people say that they don't think he's a really good fit next to. And dude, I don't understand that at all. To me, he's the perfect fit. He's a big guard. Take away a lot of the ball handling responsibilities from Trae. So it's going to be interesting, I think, like especially with Trae, to see be off ball a lot more than we've seen him in the past. And I think with somebody like DeJounte Murray and the skill set that this dude has, it's going to really like make Trae's game shine even more, I think. And then the defensive hustle that DeJounte has as well is just such a great cover up for Trae's. Like, whatever you think of Trae at this point, you're delusional if you still think, like, if you think this guy's going to be a good defender in the league. I don't think it's going to ever really happen for him. So this is the best thing you can do if you're team building, like Trae is the guy. you have to get guys like DeJounte Murray. The reason that I would go ahead and say B minus, B-ish area is I just don't think they did enough besides that. And I think that there's still like moves this team could make, but they just need to do something else. And one of my big things, and we talk about this a lot off stream, is because one of our good friends is a Hawks fan. I'm just not a big John Collins guy. I really am not. I think he's super two-dimensional, and the amount of money you're paying him and the responsibilities that he needs to fill on the court when you have a guy like Trey, they don't really match up with guys like Capella, for example, right? Like they're just too similar of players. And John Collins I just haven't seen John Collins improve very much over time. So I would ding them pretty heavily for not. Like, I think there was a world in which they could have made a John Collins and a pick move for DeAndre Ayton. It's a huge trade for this team. And if we're talking that trade happens, this is like an A plus for me. But they didn't do anything like that. So I'm going to stick with the B minus. What do you think, Bertie?
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to have to agree with you here. I think it was a B just because I think by getting DeJounte Murray, and I'll go back to the moves really quick so people can see on the screen. I love the moves that they made. Getting DeJounte Murray, getting AJ Griffin. I think AJ Griffin's going to be a great player for them eventually, depending on how they use him. Obviously, the 16th pick. So we'll see like what happens with his, maybe not career, but more so like what his minutes is going to look like for this upcoming season. But I think this team did pretty well. The only thing, like you said, I think they're missing that one star player, in my opinion, that will get them over the hump, right? That one star player that's going to really push them over the edge to get them back into, I would say, the top 4. Because right now, to me, they feel like a top 6, top 7 type of team where they'll have to play in the playing game. And so to me, that's where I feel like the Hawks are at right now. And so if I was to look at the scale again, like we just did here, I'd probably put them at a B, and I think that's probably about fair. Do you think that's fair, putting him there, put him in the B?
Yeah, I guess I'd probably stick with the B minus. I'm a little lower on it than you are. I just don't think they did enough.
So if we're
I
doing,
don't know. I don't necessarily think they're like a. I guess we're on a tier maker.
Yeah,
Let's go B. That's fine.
B?
That's
okay.
fine.
Okay, we'll go B.
Mind
there.
also dropping that link for the off-season transactions page you're looking at?
Yeah, I'll just
Discord.
Yeah, I'll put that in the Discord for you. And let's move on to the Boston Celtics. That's another. Obviously, we get right into it. Okay, I just put it in the general chat for you, Pete. Should be there.
I mean, when you look at these teams, before we get into Boston in particular, I mean, this offseason's been nuts, dude.
Yeah.
Like, every team has stuff where it's like, oh my gosh, what are they doing? Or, like, I love what they're doing.
Yeah. So let's see here. So let's go to their picks really quick. So we got Danilo Gallinari picked up in free agency. Via trade, they obviously got Malcolm Brogdon, and through the draft, they got J.D. Davidson. They lost Fitz, Morgan, Naismith, Stauskas, Theis, obviously players that are just more so rotation guys. I think if I was to rate the offseason for us currently, depending on some certain moves, and we can kind of maybe sneakily talk about it just a little bit, just because I know we're on a time crunch. But, for me, the Boston Celtics, when I look at them, they did enough. But I'm not sure if Malcolm Brogdon is the guy to get us over the hump. Just because I think for me, the offseason has to come more so from Jason Tatum and Marcus Smart and really understanding the offensive principles of having to move without the basketball. I just feel like there's times where those guys, especially in the finals, where they got stuck, they took some bad shots, and it really cost us a championship. And again, maybe that's just me being I wouldn't say maybe a half glass hard critic.
You're a hard critic. Really, of the Celtics. You've always been a hard critic of the Celtics. You can't help it. I'm the same with the Knicks.
And so I would have to give them a B, just because I think what the offseason moves they made were good. Now, if we can get Durant, I think that moves us up to the S tier, but that's just me.
It really depends on the trade, but I would agree with you personally. Dude, the Celtics are super tough, man. This is one of the toughest teams to rank in the league. I personally, without a KD trade, let's just go with the assumption that KD does not end up on this team, right? This is an A to me, personally. You make it to the finals. I picked them to go to the finals before the playoffs started, right? So I was already pretty high on the squad. still high on them. Like, I think like they genuinely didn't need to do much to run it back. Like, the amount of talent they have off the bench is solid. They're all young. They're only getting better. I really love the Gallinari signing, how cheap they got him. And just like the movement, like let's pretend like Gallinari is a statue on offense, right? He's gonna go stand in the corner, take a three, stand at the top, take a three. That's all he does, right?
Yeah.
Still, that is a player that the Celtics did not have. Like that level of offensive, just he can make a shot out of nothing. They didn't have dudes like that. That's really why they lost in the finals. Is that the Brogdon trade, the fact that they didn't give up hardly anything of serious value to get Brogdon, that trade alone is S tier to me. That's one of the best trades of the offseason.
Okay. Going S tier.
That trade alone is the S tier. I also really like JD Davidson. Like I thought he looked sick in the summer league. Him at 53, he's a guy that's like a late bench player. Like he might get a few minutes in the beginning of the season, but I think he's a guy that's going to work himself into minutes by the end of the season. Like he's got like a lot of the things that teams need, like late season. So I like this team's offseason a lot. I think you guys just got better. Like you didn't get worse in any way. You added two of the holes that you needed to fill, which is a backup forward and a solid ball handler. Like that's literally the two things this team needed. Yeah. So I have to give it an A. I'm borderline an S, but I think that's a little much.
Okay.
And let's just talk about the KD thing real quick.
Yeah.
I would agree with Mo and Sean in the chat to a certain extent, saying that Mo says if they trade Smart or Brown, they're ruined. I think if they trade Smart and Brown, they're ruined in the sense that it's too much for KD. Not just like the two of them alone, like on a value-to-value basis. You can't even just trade Brown and Smart for KD.
Yeah.
But there's a level of culture, and I hate to be the culture guy, that gets ruined by making a big trade like that, right? And I think like the thing with Smart and Brown, I think you need one of those guys to sustain the culture, sustain that like hardworking, defensive-minded attitude that they got last season that made them so special. Losing either one of those guys is a huge blow, but both of them is just the whole identity of the team is different at that point. Say they go get KD and it's Brown and like 4 or 5 firsts or whatever it ends up being if they do it. I think that's a W, man. You're taking a guy in Jaylen Brown, and as much as you guys have to like Jaylen Brown, he's awesome. He was the most consistent player for the Celtics in the finals.
Yep, that's true.
He also consistently could not handle the ball like any game in the playoffs. Like this dude looked like Bambi when he had to dribble the ball. And say what you will about Jaylen Brown. That's a huge flaw in anybody's game on a team that has like lackluster ball handlers in general. So if you can take a guy like Jaylen Brown and go get a top 15 player of all time, I don't know how you could treat that as a loss, personally. It's not like Jaylen Brown is 21 and playing the level he is. Like he's 26, right?
27.
27, even more. Like people act like you're trading like Anthony Edwards. Like I think you're nuts to think this is the same thing. Jaylen Brown is really solid. He will never sniff the level of Kevin Durant. Like you're delusional if you think that. And a lot of the people I think that say getting rid of Jaylen Brown is like the biggest L you can take as far as getting KD. I just don't even know what to tell you, man. These are the same people who wanted to trade him 6 months ago for a lesser player than KD. So I would put it as an S if they could get him for one of those two guys personally.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with you. I think that if you get rid of both of those guys, I think it'd be a mistake. It clearly for the Celtics, in order to take that next step, in order for them to really be the team that I think they can be, that we need them to be. Well, at least me, right? Because I'm a Celtics fan. You're more Knicks. But for me, like I just need them to, and it has to come from Tatum, because I think for me, Tatum's on superstar watch alert, more so from the fact that I need him to play like a superstar this year, meaning that he does the things that we need him to do, the things that make guys like LeBron James and Kevin Durant those type of tier players. And again, they're the exception to the rule, right? But I feel like we're having kind of the similar conversation that we had with Devin Booker last year, and I feel like we're going to have it with Jason Tatum this year. And I need him to not be in that conversation where it's Devin Booker route, where it's like he's not really a superstar, but he's a really good player, like a star player. And
As much
that's
as I
where,
don't like that comparison, I do agree with you.
and so to me, and again, it's not comparing their game. It's more so that
Oh, no.
yeah, that feeling of like, okay, you need to take it to the next level now because now the world is watching you. You finally have arrived. You're not 19 anymore, like the Boston Celtics fan like to claim each and every year, right? You know, and to me, like that's where I want Tatum to really take ownership of. Okay, I really didn't play very well in the finals. I need to work with somebody that's going to help me be a team player, not someone that's going to work on these ISO moves. With these trainers that only work in training modes. Like then the moves that you're never going to use in the game. Like I don't want him to work on that anymore. It's time to be a team player.
At the end of the day, like to me, I probably wouldn't mess with the team. Like that's just my opinion, right? You made it to the finals, just did not have the ball handling or shot creation when it came down to it to match up with like a really offensively gifted team in the Warriors. It's that simple, right? Go find people that give you better options to make their own shot. Do that. Do that without having to give up any of your starters. That's a huge W. That's a huge W.
Yep.
Just don't think in any circumstance you can ever be mad at a team for going after one of the best players in the league. Like I always you have to give teams the benefit of the doubt in the sense that the end goal for every single season is winning a championship.
Yeah.
That is more important than winning a potential championship 4 years from now. It always is. That's why the Raptors did what they did to get Kawhi, and they don't regret losing him the next season.
Yeah.
Happy with that because what happens? You won a championship. So
yeah.
Durant having no loyalty is like whatever to me. Who cares? You trade him. If you end up with KD, certainly locked in to have him for 2 or 3 seasons. He's not gonna sit out. Like that's kind of the one thing about trading for KD right now that I don't think people give enough credit is like Nets are going to give this dude up. And the problem with the whole situation is they're probably not. Yeah. You're getting a dude on one of the best contracts in the league, relatively speaking, to how good of a player he is. He's locked in, and he's past his, early 30s. So I don't think you can be upset at it. I just wouldn't mess with it. But I'm going with an A. I'm going with an A. I like it.
Yeah, let's go A. Let's go to Brooklyn. Speaking of Kevin Durant and the Nets, a nice little segue to that. Brooklyn. Let's look at what they did so far. Not really too much. They added TJ Warren. They got Royce O'Neal via trade. Did not select anybody in the draft, but they are losing Andre Drummond and Bruce Brown. I think that Bruce Brown loss is actually going to be pretty big for that team in terms of just energy and all that stuff. But if I was to grade their off season, and again, I think it's harsh for me to say it because I think it's not really something that's happened now, but if I had to grade them, I'd probably give them a C. And the reason why I give them a C is because I think they're stuck in limbo right now of what to do as an organization. Because, the owner has come out and said some things. The players have obviously requested a trade, aka Kevin Durant. And then, of course, Kyrie Irving being part of that trade as well. They're stuck in limbo. It seems like they're in no direction which way they want to go. And again, like I said, it could be due to the fact that Rudy Gobert trade did freeze the trade. It felt like all hell froze at this point. That's what it feels like for the Brooklyn Nets. Like it just feels like everything's frozen and nothing is moving right now for them. And so adding TJ Warren and Royce O'Neal would be great additions if they were to keep those two players. But since it looks like they want to get rid of them, or maybe not want to, but they are going to grant the request for Durant, I have to give them a C.
I really don't think they're going to. I really genuinely think KD is going to be on the Nets next season. I think his biggest thing is Kyrie right now. But even beyond that, like, if you look at any of the trades, the proposed trades that have come out that have been offered to Brooklyn or even just rumored to be, their number is way too high. And that speaks of a team that's just not going to do this unless we're 100% comfortable. And from what we know about Joe Tsai as a businessman, he is one of the most powerful people in the NBA. I don't think that gets talked about enough necessarily with Brooklyn because he doesn't really act like it all the time. We only see the circus that is Brooklyn, but Joe Tsai, the owner of Brooklyn, of the Nets, is an incredibly powerful, kind of cutthroat businessman, like behind the scenes. So he's not going to get fleeced on a Kevin Durant trade. He's not going to let that front office screw this up like they've screwed up most of the things that have happened over the last 3 years.
Yeah.
This is one of the bigger swing teams because I think that there are certain things that could happen with this team where I would very quickly say, oh, dang, like that's kind of like a big W for the squad. But right now, I'm going to go D.
D, okay.
I'm going to go D. I think the Royce O'Neal trade is absolutely abominable. I thought that was mind-blowingly stupid. Like, what are you going to get Royce O'Neal for? Let alone a first-round pick? Like, mind blown. I still am mind blown by that trade.
Yeah.
The TJ Warren signing, though, was really nice. A very friendly contract, a guy that's underperformed the last season and a half. Like, by all accounts, TJ Warren is a very legitimate player in the NBA. Like, he is an easy 20 if he's healthy. So,
yeah.
I like that signing. I think he goes really well with Ben, a healthy playing Ben Simmons, if Ben Simmons ever plays.
Yep.
The reason I give him a D is just like you haven't done really anything other than make this weird Royce O'Neal trade and sign these two guys that don't move the needle in any way, shape, or form, right? Yeah. But I do like the fact that they didn't re-sign any of those guys other than Bruce Brown. I agree with you. I think losing him was kind of an L, but Drummond, who cares? LaMarcus Aldridge, Goran Dragic, Blake Griffin, James Johnson. Like, you shouldn't re-sign any of those guys. Good move on your part, right?
Mm-hmm.
Only caveat, and this is the reason why I say they could swing really high. There is a world in which KD trade happens and they get the biggest package return of all time, right? For a guy that doesn't want to be there, they end up with like a legit star in return for KD and a bunch of picks. And if they make the KD trade, I would see that Kyrie gets traded as well. There's literally no shot they could bring just Kyrie back. That will never happen. So say the KD trade happens, they get the biggest return ever for a player, and they make some sort of trade for Kyrie Irving. I mean, you could be looking just like one of the situations where we have like the ultimate blow it up team. Like this team could come back with like 95% of a different roster. So they're kind of already like that, but even more so if they make those two trades. I would be pretty interested with that offseason. It would really depend on who they got back.
Yeah.
I think what's going to end up happening is it's going to be the status quo, though. Kyrie, KD are back with this whack team. That's about as D as you can get in the NBA. It's pretty close to an F, too. But I have KD and Kyrie technically, so I don't know if you can get a D.
Okay, so we'll leave it at D. Justin, what's up, guys? Happy Wednesday. Happy Wednesday to you as well, Justin. Yeah, well, we'll go D. We'll go D just to and let us know. You know, maybe at the end we'll let you guys pick one team that you can move up or down. So,
dude, we might. I don't know. They might be an F. We might need to come back. I might have to think about that one throughout the stream.
Well, unfortunately, there's only D. If I had more time, I would have definitely. I would have edited the name.
No F. Okay, that's all right. D is a basically the F of this tier list, so we'll take that.
All right, let's go with the Charlotte Hornets. You know, they didn't really do too much, and obviously their offseason was about as different as you can get for teams just because of how many players looked like they were in trouble just from the law. Yeah. So they definitely had a different offseason than most. Obviously, no free agency, no trades. Michael Jordan, maybe a little frugal. Who knows?
Honestly, can you make an F tier? This is an F. This is an F, dude.
Okay, I'll try to make an F tier. I'll maybe rename it and just say like worst off season, or I'll edit it as you speak. But yeah, let's see here. Miles Bridges obviously has his issues with the police. Pled not guilty earlier, just reporting that. Montrezl Harrell, unrestricted. I'm not sure if they're going to bring him back. Scotty Lewis, Kabaka, Isaiah Thomas may or may not come back. I know they're thinking about bringing Kemba Walker back as a reunion. Do you want this as an F, right? This is F? Hornets are F tier?
I think this is such an atrocious offseason because we're not even talking about the first major L they took, which was their coaching debacle. Hiring, by all accounts, I think a coach that we both like in James Borrego, somebody who would kind of like raise the ceiling long term of the squad and kind of made us like slight believers, at least in Charlotte at different times. And then you get screwed over by Kenny Atkinson, even though he didn't really screw you. You kind of screwed yourself, right, by putting yourself in that position in the first place. And then you end up with Steve Clifford back. Like, we're back literally 3 or 4 seasons ago with this team. They're about to get Kemba Walker back, and they have Steve Clifford as their coach. And their second best player is probably not going to play in the NBA next season for reasons he definitely should not be allowed to play in the league for. The only thing is, I actually like the pick of Mark Williams for this team. Like, I did enjoy that pick because I just think he brings a much needed facet of the game to their squad, like just that high energy big to kind of just demand attention in the paint. So I like that, right? It's just everything else is so bad, dude. It's so bad. And maybe this is where I get a little controversial, okay? Maybe this is where I get a little controversial.
All right.
I have not seen, I like LaMelo a lot, all right?
Uh-huh.
I'm not going to diss him or say he's a bad player. That's not really what I mean.
You dating older women
Just
that way?
I need to see him raise the floor of a team, right? Like, if he is truly a superstar, like a lot of people think he is,
Mm-hmm.
he has to raise the floor of this team. And if there's any season to show that this guy can raise the floor of a pretty whack squad, this is it. He's got to show it.
Got it.
I'm not sure he's capable. I'm not sure. It's just not necessarily the style of basketball he plays, but I would like to see it. And I think he's got it in him. I just haven't seen it thus far in his career.
Yeah. So really quick, Pete, I changed the names of them. So we're going game-changing offseason at the top, good offseason, solid offseason, mid offseason, close to worse, and then worst offseason as kind of our tier system now. Obviously,
I like that.
came up with some really bad names, but we'll work on that a little bit later down the line. But I have to agree with you, Pete. I mean, this, like, when we look at the movements that the Hornets made this offseason, there was nothing really there that I was like, yes, this guy's gonna definitely change the Hornets. Like, Mark Williams is a really good pickup, but the losses that they had for this offseason, obviously Miles Bridges with his issues, domestic violence and whatnot. Montrezl Harrell, I think it sucks that he kind of left it. Let the audience pick the order we talk about. No, I'm not gonna let you pick the order of the teams. You got Montrezl Harrell, you got Scotty Lewis. I mean, they didn't really do anything, like you said, Pete. There's no player that they picked up or no one there that really stands out and says, like, yes, this Hornets team could make a push for a playoff game or for a playoff team. Like, they're just not going to do that. And that's the frustrating part. You had a chance to get D'Antoni, who I think they should have tried to go get, because if you see the elevation of the point guards that he has had in his that he's had through his career, get guys like James Harden in his 30 points per game, 2 MVP season. Got Steve Nash, his MVPs. Like, you get LaMelo Ball with D'Antoni. Like, that is a ridiculous steroid booster. Like, without it being illegal, right? And so that to me is where I am confused with the Hornets of, like, what they just seem each and every year since Michael Jordan has owned the team. It just doesn't feel like they've made progression to, okay, we have this young core. Let's see what we can do with this young core. It seems to me that they always get misfit toys or players that don't really fit together and just can't seem to get over the hump each and every time. And I don't know, it's starting to look a little fraudulent for Michael Jordan as a NBA owner so far.
Yeah, dude, this is just a bad offseason. I really don't think the coaching situation could be understated. Like, how many times have we seen that in NBA history? I mean, it's a short list where you fire, by all accounts, a well-respected, pretty good coach. A team like, we talked about this pretty in depth when they fired James Borrego. Like, it didn't really make sense to fire him at the time they did. They didn't do anything to the team to have justified saying we expected more from you guys,
Yeah.
Like, that's when teams start to that's that impatient zone, where you have a guy like Michael Jordan, who is, by all accounts, he's going to take it personal and he's going to be impatient, right? Like, that's his thing. So This is about as big a step backwards as you can make because, like, we're going to Steve Clifford, who I like as a coach. Genuinely, I think Steve Clifford's fine. It's just you know what this team is with Steve Clifford, and how long did it take until we go say we're going to get Kemba Walker? Like,
Yeah.
if you watched any Knicks game with Kemba Walker last season,
Mm-hmm.
you know that that's a mistake.
Yeah.
Honestly, to be fair, if you watched any Celtics game with Kemba Walker 2 seasons ago, you know that's a mistake. Alone 2 years later with this Charlotte Hornets team, this is going to be a disaster of a season. I just hope if there's any saving grace, it's the fact that you do have superstar potential player in LaMelo Ball. You do have that. So
Yeah.
there's a world in which he elevates his game and really shows that this is a guy of the future. So maybe they're challenging him. Maybe that's what this is. I honestly, one last thing for them too is they didn't even really make the easy moves they should have made, which is like getting off of Gordon Hayward's contract. There are teams around the league that would take Gordon Hayward on the contract he's on. It's not great. It's also definitely worse to have him in the situation that you're in. It doesn't work when you have him. He's either injured or he doesn't fit with the squad that well. So they have to do something. This is another team that has to do something. I just don't think they're going to. I would be surprised if we see a worse offseason than this coming up.
Yeah. And let's move on to the Chicago Bulls. They obviously added Andre Drummond in free agency. Didn't sign anybody via trade. They got Dalen Terry from the NBA draft. They lost Troy Brown Jr. He went to the Lakers. The Bulls, I want to see them run it back with this team. I'd probably give them a mid offseason. They were kind of mid. They didn't really do anything to bolster their squad, but they also, obviously signing Zach LaVine is a huge boost. So they obviously can run it back with the same squad.
Re-sign Zach LaVine. That is a little boost to that. I agree. I didn't think about that.
And so I would just give them mid. Not really much to talk about other than I want to see them run it back with a healthy squad this time.
I agree. And we need to see Lonzo Ball get himself healthy. I think that definitely needs to happen. Real thing, I do like Dalen Terry a lot for the squad. I think he brings a lot of good energy and defense to this team. I think that'll be a nice addition. That should work out pretty well.
All right.
Andre Drummond, I'm not sure about, but we'll see.
All right, let's move on to the Cavaliers. Cavaliers obviously regaining Ricky Rubio, which actually is a huge pickup. Robin Lopez, Raul Neto, great role-playing guys that know their roles. Through the draft, they got Abaji, they got Diop, they got Isaiah Mobley, the brother. I'm sure that was part of the signing of his older brother from last year. And then, of course, they had no losses. So they're returning a pretty solid squad. I talked about this in a different video. To me, if we go in terms of tiers, let me just do tiers really quick. I have them as having a good offseason. Because I think by adding Ricky Rubio back to the roster, you get a healthy Colin Sexton. This team was top 4 when that stuff was happening. And so if they can continue and not have the injury bug that they had last season, I could see them being a top 4 team. I know that's crazy to think for some people because, they haven't been good since the LeBron James era. But I am excited for the Cavaliers moving forward by having Ricky Rubio, by playing that long, lengthy style that they have been, with Mobley obviously being the forefront of the defense. I don't know about you, Pete, but I am excited for the Cavaliers moving forward and what they can do in the future.
You know me. I'm very high on the squad. I might be the only other person watching this or listening to this ever to agree with you. I think they're a top 4 team if they stay healthy, personally. A lot of that has to do, and this is why I'm going to agree with you and say they're in, what'd you put them in, good tier?
Yeah, I put them in good offseason.
Good offseason. I would put them there too, and for the mere reason that timeline, they seem to understand the timeline they're on, right?
Yeah.
This whole squad is going to rotate around 3 players. It's Darius Garland, Jared Allen, and Evan Mobley, and I would argue that it's really Evan Mobley, Darius Garland, Jared Allen in that order, right?
Yeah.
If Evan Mobley takes the steps forward in his game that I think he will, and the thing that we always talk about leading into the draft with Mobley and Cade and Jalen Green, the reason I've always been so high on Evan Mobley and still am to this day, I see a potential world in which Evan Mobley's offense catches up to his defense. He has all of the tools. He has good mechanics. He's fluid with ball handling. He can create his own shot. 7'1".
Mm-hmm.
dude was legitimately top 10 defensive player of the year candidate last year. I mean, this team should only take a step forward realistically.
Yeah.
And I think like between the signings of just getting Rubio back, having somebody who to take shots away from your guys that need shots, but also can really distribute and just handle. And
Yeah.
like, one thing with having a guy like Ricky Rubio, say something that's actually going to like counteract something I'm going to say later for the Knicks, right? You're getting a guy who can take a lot of responsibility away from players who have bad habits with Ricky Rubio, but you're getting him super cheap. And it's the reason I like the Jalen Brunson signing, except for the fact that you're paying him a fraction of what the Knicks are paying Jalen Brunson. And I know that gives you a lot more offensively with the scoring potentially, and he's younger, and we don't know what his upside is long-term necessarily, but Rubio is just a stabilizer, right? It's so good for a team this young, but especially this skilled guy like that. We're going to thrive. I love this squad. And I think, you know, when you have a guy that is, in my opinion, generational like Mobley is, you do what you can to make Evan Mobley happy. You go get Isaiah Mobley, who's legitimately a solid prospect. Isaiah Mobley is a solid prospect. People have only taken this as like a Kumpo type signing where he's going to be like a guy on the bench, like just at the end of the bench cheering for his brother. Maybe has potential to get minutes eventually. He's solid. And then what's his name? The 14th overall. What's his name? I'm forgetting.
Abaji?
Yeah, dude, Abaji. Come on. He's nasty. I love this squad. I'm with you 100%.
Yeah, 3-and-D. And again, we have to also give shout out to Coach. 4. Yeah, definitely top 4. Shout out to Coach JB Bickerstaff. Finally getting an opportunity to be a head coach and more so is responsible for what they're doing in Cleveland. Again, I like what they were doing in Cleveland. Again, they're moving in silent, which I like. And so I'm excited to see what they do moving forward into the future. Let's move on to the next team here. We got the Dallas Mavericks. The Dallas Mavericks, obviously, the Luka Doncic show. They added JaVale McGee via free agency, added Christian Wood via the trade, got Jaden Hardy, who I like. And obviously they lost Brown, Brunson, Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, Boban, Marjanovic were traded to the Rockets, obviously, in that Christian Wood trade. If I were to grade their offseason, I'd probably give them a mid offseason. Maybe I would say between mid and close to worst, because I think they still need one more piece in order to be really competitive. Again, they were competitive in the series that they were in, obviously beating the Phoenix Suns in that series, playing against the Golden State Warriors. It was just disappointing to see that Luka Doncic, didn't have a supporting cast that I think he deserves to have around him in order for this squad to really take over and really be the guy that I know he can be. But that might just be part of Luka ball for the rest of his career. That's kind of the style he likes to play, be the main guy, kind of have everything around him, kind of LeBron James-esque. But I would like them to have at least one more guy on that team. And so I'm curious to see how they're able to do it with Christian Wood. I know a lot of people are hyped about Christian Wood as an additional piece to the Mavericks. And obviously running it back with Spencer Dinwiddie as well. I think it's just a mid-tier offseason. Nothing too crazy, but also nothing that is going to be groundbreaking where they're, in the game-changing offseason.
Yeah, this is one of the tougher ones. I would agree with you. Like, I think that this is a bad offseason, relatively speaking. And I think it's kind of the definition of like a 1 step forward, 2 steps back, maybe even a 3 step back type situation, because it addressed a serious need in Christian Wood. Like you're basically upgrading from Porzingis at midseason, right? He's not going to take as much away from your team with like his injury concerns and things like that. But Christian Wood is also kind of infamous for his locker room behavior, right? We've heard and seen that at every location he's been at. People like to pretend that stuff is just the media, right? Like that stuff doesn't just get made up for no reason, generally speaking. But I do, at the end of the day, I would still put that as a plus to the team. Like he is legitimately a bucket in the league. Christian Wood is gonna score on this team, especially with the attention Luka gets. That is a nice pickup. I like it a lot. The biggest problem, I think, is that they lost a piece that addresses their biggest need and haven't done anything to replace it, and that's Brunson.
Yeah.
that has been a consistent
Mm-hmm.
issue with the Mavericks and Luka's tenure with them. He needs some help with the ball handling in terms of taking the load off because he gets so much attention. He gets so much attention in every game. Having anybody who can take some of that pressure off him, but especially who can lead their offense while he takes well-needed breaks, is critical to this team's success. Like, there's such a huge gap between Luka being with Mavericks on the floor and Luka not being on the floor. And that was true even with Brunson, who was really solid for them.
Mm-hmm.
But now they've lost Brunson, which was a huge, huge miss on their part. Already have to downvote their offseason just on the way they handled Brunson's situation. And then they've gotten no replacement for Brunson. Not even like a decent replacement. Like they didn't do anything to replace him. So that is like a big, big, big L for this team. I think that unless Luka comes in, and we've seen one of the big things for them too is though we've seen healthy, in shape Luka this offseason. So maybe what I'm saying gets offset by that. He can take more pressure. He can, he's not going to come in a little out of shape like he did last offseason.
Yeah.
I don't know. They have to get another guard. That's my opinion. I would honestly to put them in close to worst for the mere fact that they have no guard help for Luka. I think that's terrible.
Okay. Well, let's do it.
This team easily doesn't make the playoffs if Luka gets hurt at any point in the season.
I definitely agree. They're probably one of the worst teams in the league if that happens. So I'll agree with you, Pete. I'll move them down close to worst. Again, like you said, didn't make any moves. You're hoping Christian Wood's that guy, but again, the locker room stuff continues to pop up for Christian Wood. So let's see if he can shake that off in the future. And let's move on to our next team, the Denver Nuggets. The Jokic train. Bruce Brown, they added in free agency. They added DeAndre Jordan. I'm not sure about that one. Contavious Caldwell-Pope from the Wizards, they got via trade. They got Ish Smith. And then via the draft, they got Christian Braun, Peyton Watson, who I really like.
I like him a lot too.
Ishmael Kamagate. Hopefully I pronounced that right. Probably did not. But they lost Will Barton. They lost Forbes. They lost JaMychal Green, Monte Morris, and Austin Rivers. And obviously they have Campazzo, Cousins, and Howard as kind of unrestricted free agents. They may or may not re-sign them. I think in terms of just an offseason in general, I think it was enough to where people will be okay with it. But at the same time, this is really an offseason where we need to see if both guys, that being Michael Porter Jr. and Jamal Murray, can stay healthy, because I think that's really the biggest thing for them, because obviously they ran it with just Jokic playing against the Warriors, and so it was unfair in that sense. Again, life isn't fair, but at the same time, I don't know. It's not an offseason that moved me. I would probably put them, honestly, as close to worst. And that to me...
This is the first one we're going to disagree with.
And the reason why I say close to worst is because I don't think they did any moves that necessarily moved the needle besides the Bruce Brown trade. I love that pickup for them. I think he's a great player, great rebounder. But at the same time, they didn't do too much to get over the hump. So I'm going close to worst.
I'm going to go... I think this is a pretty good offseason. I really
good offseason. Wow.
I don't know. I'll just go solid. I'll go solid just to keep it maybe a little bit more reasonable. I think that this is definitely not a bad offseason, though. I like... And here's my rationale, right? Okay. I think the DeAndre Jordan signing is whack. I think DeAndre Jordan has been completely washed for probably 3 or 4 seasons now. The fact that he still is... Mm-hmm. I don't really understand why these teams keep signing him. He must be really awesome in the locker room. That's like one of the only things I can think with him. He seems to be a likable guy. So that being said, I love the Bruce Brown signing for this team. Mm-hmm. I think he provides a really nice, like, physical person to help Jokic down low. And he's a weird shaped player. Like, we've seen Bruce Brown thrive in offensive situations where focus is being taken away from him and he can kind of clean up down low, right?
Yeah.
Exactly what's going to happen with Jokic. And imagine the feeds he's going to get from Jokic too are so much nicer than even Kyrie's. And that's like, I mean, that's saying something. Like, it just happens to be Jokic is the best passing big man of all time. Also, Kentavious Caldwell-Pope, another person who addresses a serious issue for this team, and it's perimeter
I'm not sold on
defense.
him.
He's not my favorite player. I won't pretend to say he's like an incredible player, but I do think he's legitimately a good perimeter defensive player, and that's something that this team really needs. Like, that's big help for them. Biggest thing for this squad that I really like is, again, kind of like the Cavaliers, an understanding of the timeline they're on. You know, this is a team that has been staffed for 2 straight seasons, almost 3, right?
Yeah.
When they're healthy, I don't know how you could think that any team with Jokic, a player of Jamal Murray's caliber, and Michael Porter Jr., if those 2 guys are healthy, is not championship level to me. I think that having Jokic is alone enough to put you in the conversation because he's one of those 5 to 10 guys who actually changes the game of basketball. Like, his game is so different.
Mm-hmm.
I just think they got rid of players who take away some of the things that make this team special, and I'm kind of referring to a player like Will Barton. I think takes a lot of shots, thinks the offense is a lot more about him than it usually is. That's like one of Will Barton's big things. And you can say the same thing about guys like Monty Morris and Austin Rivers, right? Like, those 2 guys kind of chew up some of the time that better players can get offensively. And I've never been big on Bryn Forbes either. Brian Forbes, whatever you want to call him. I've never really liked him. I think he's the definition of one-dimensional. I just like this team in the sense that they address some of the holes they had, make any panic moves, and they're going to give a chance to the guys that we know are super talented. Like, we know Michael Porter Jr. is an absolute bucket. And we know Jamal Murray has moments like Bubble Murray was something else. We haven't seen him healthy since then, really. So I like this team a lot. I would say solid for the mere fact that they probably need one more move to make it something really good. But I don't think you can say bad because it's not like they're coming from a season last year where things went right for them. So, I like this Denver team. They're one of my championship contenders coming into this season. I'll just spoil that for a later stream now. I think that this team has a chance.
All right, and let's move on to the Detroit Pistons. This team, of course.
Dude, this one, we can keep this one quick. This is a big W for them.
Yeah.
This is a major win for this team all around. You want me to take it?
Yeah, why don't you take it really quick? I'm just going to read Sean's comment, then you can take it. All my teams I want to talk about are at the bottom of the alphabetical order, shaking my head. Sorry,
Let's
Sean.
do one for Sean after this.
Okay,
Let's do one for Sean
We'll do one for you, Sean. You lucky pizza great guy.
I'll be nice to you, Sean. I could do that. Let's talk about the Pistons real quick, though. Another team understanding their timeline perfectly. I know I keep saying that, but that's something that I think really gets understated in the league nowadays. Like, teams genuinely, that's when you see panic trades the most. And once we get to Minnesota, that's a team we can really talk about. Maybe they a little bit in the sense that they didn't understand the timeline, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. Pistons understand perfectly. This is a young team. Cade Cunningham is the guy. We need to build for 3 to 4 years from now and see what is going on with the team, right? Made a bunch of trades at the draft and, in the days subsequently following. They took some bad contracts from the Knicks, but got a really solid player in Jalen Duren in return. Both really are high on him. He looked awesome in Summer League. Even more importantly, they got Jaden Ivey. I mean, they managed to walk out of this offseason in a position to walk away with their 3 best players in 3 years from now, right? They have Cade, they have Jaden Ivey, and Jalen Duren. I think those are 3 guys that you can put on a list of, like, is this one of the better young cores in the league, potentially? I'd argue that, I like the fit with all those guys. Trading Jeremy Grant for what they got in return was nice. They didn't lose anything that really impacts anything. I like this Pistons team a lot. I'm actually interested to see how competitive they are with a full season of Cade. They're not necessarily going to be trying to be bad anymore. Like, this is the team that should show some improvement this season if Jaden Ivey shows what we know he can, or think he can at least, and Jalen Duren as well. So the Pistons offseason a lot. I wouldn't necessarily put it in game-changing, but I'm going to put it at good. Yeah. And I think that's a hard good. I would actually put them ahead of the Celtics on that list.
Okay, I'll put them in there for you. If I had to rank it, I'd probably say it's a solid offseason just because I think I need to see a little bit more from some of these other guys. That being, of course, the guys like Killian Hayes, Isaiah Stewart,
Yeah, I mean,
obviously.
Steve Day looks nice.
Yeah, I mean, I think the role players that they got, they're playing really well. So I'm excited to see them in terms of being like a league pass team. Obviously, we're gonna get league pass here on the charge. I'm excited for them. They got Jaden Ivey, who I really like. They got Jalen Duren, who I will continue to talk about. Probably have a man crush on this guy just because of how hard he plays the game, how much of a difference maker he was in that Gonzaga game, even. And even just in the summer league games that he played, like you could see the potential with him. And if you can add that with Cade Cunningham, you can add that with Bay, and now that you take Jeremy Grant out of there, and now you give the minutes to these other younger guys, like you said, they understand like where they're at with this team in terms of, okay, this group is going to grow together. This group could potentially be a great playoff group in the next couple of years, and I love what they did. And I think it's a solid one. I think adding Alex Burks as well. I'm not sure if they're gonna get. I'm not sure what their situation is for that team, but I would look to just kind of keep the young guys there, and then in a year or two, that's when I would start to add the veterans that can really shape this locker room to being something special. And again, I'm excited. I think like I talked about, and then probably will say ad nauseum. This is an exciting summer league, or sorry, summer league. They were exciting in the summer league, but this is a great league pass team to watch. So I'll agree with you. I think I'll move it up to good offseason because they definitely made some good moves. And if Isaiah Stewart can shoot the threes like he's shown that he can, we're looking at something dangerous right now. It's a little hot and dangerous.
Change it just a little bit. Let's put him above the Cavs but below the Celtics. I don't think it's as good as the Celtics. I had to stop and think about it.
Okay, we'll put them in the middle.
I still really like this offseason from them. Like, there is a world in which we're comparing Jalen Duren to like somebody like Bam Adebayo in like a couple seasons. To me,
oh wow,
we've already heard a lot of Ja Morant, Jaden Ivey comparisons, but then regardless, when you have a guy like Cade who can really like, and Cade is special, man. Mm-hmm. And I've never been the most high on him, but like if you watched, he put up a stat line in that last quarter of last season that literally I think only LeBron did ever. I think he might be the only other player who ever did it, and it was something along the lines of like a 23-7-7, somewhere around there.
Yeah,
that's wild. And he's 19 years old. He's 6'8". I like this squad a lot, and this is one of those differences where we talk about a team like Charlotte earlier, Bernie, where a lot of this upcoming season is going to be hinging upon what you see from your main guy, right? Yep. For both of those teams. Charlotte, this season is going to swing really rapidly for them, or wildly, I should say, between if LaMelo is having a good off season or a good season or bad season. And the same thing is with Detroit. To me, and maybe this is where people start to come from my throat here, I'd rather have Cade. And I think Cade influences winning more than LaMelo so far with what I've seen. And I know that's crazy because the Pistons were the worst team in the league last year.
Mm-hmm.
I think that it provides potential. And I guess I'll leave it at there because people aren't going to like it regardless. But what are you going to do?
All right, let's move on to one of Sean's teams. Let's move on to the Sacramento Kings, who I think were... Oh, no, they were...
Town.
Let me see if I can find him on here. Sacramento Kings.
Let me tell you this. I'll start with the Kings.
Okay.
One of my bigger their offseason has grown on me rapidly throughout the offseason. And for obvious reasons and less obvious reasons. One, I think the Keegan Murray one is the obvious one, right? Mm-hmm. He was so impressive in Summer League. And he really cemented the things that ended up putting him in that top 5 discussion, like in Summer League. He's so ready offensively. Just in general, like his skill set is so well defined what he does. Mm-hmm. I mean, I've told you this before, I think in our last 2 streams, like he is my sleeper pick, and I don't even know if sleep fair anymore for Rookie of the Year, just because I think he's going to put up points because he's so efficient at scoring. One thing that has grown on me, though, is their other 2 signings. I really like the Kevin Huerter signing for some reason. Like, think he's like a really solid role player and somebody that this team could use. And same thing for Malik Monk. Like Malik Monk and Kevin Herter are not as different as people think they are.
Mm-hmm.
Minus the fact that I would argue Malik Monk's like dynamicness is a lot higher, if that's a word, dynamicness. I might have just made that up, but it's more just the scoring, the potential. This is one of those teams where if you look at the roster, there's not a lot of guys I don't like. Like that's the thing that keeps growing on me with this team.
Yeah.
They have a lot of guys that I would want on my team. Like I would want to see Kevin Herter on my team. I would like to see Malik Monk, Davion Mitchell, any of those guys, dude. And that's the thing. Like, team that could and should make a move at some point because they have so many guards and they've kind of drafted in funky ways.
Yeah.
I don't necessarily think we can hold mistakes of last season against this offseason, you know, and that's like the Tyrese Halliburton trade, right?
Yeah.
Like, that trade was bad in the sense that to be there, you know, and he was arguably a much more valuable player long term than somebody like De'Aaron Fox is, or even maybe Sabonis is, right? The problem is they already did that. So how are we going to hold it against them? They're building a team with what they have now, and I love the Keegan Murray fit next to Sabonis, whereas I did not really like it when they first made that pick.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I'll say about. So where do you rank them in terms of the tier list?
I would say, oh man, this one's kind of tough. I'd probably put them in like the solid because John just said it in the chat. He thinks they're going to make the playoffs. I think they're a play-in team. I think they're very close to a play-in team.
Mm-hmm.
It's just one of those things where, again, it's going to depend on some of their younger dudes taking a leap. I would say solid. It's not good enough to be a good offseason.
Yeah. Here's what I'll say about that. I think that this was a solid offseason as well. I think a lot of people, when the Keegan Murray trade, and you're probably one, or the Keegan Murray selection, and it sounded like you were one of them as well. They were left a little bit flat, right? Because everyone was like, "Oh, they should have taken Ivy. They should have, you know,
or at least gotten a trade for Ivy.
For Ivy, and
something."
And I think
Sure.
a lot of people underestimate Keegan Murray. I really like his game. I think he's a solid player. I think he won MVP of the Summer League, if I'm not mistaken.
He did indeed.
And so I actually liked him a lot, you know, out of Iowa. Watching him a little bit more just because, you know, our friend Josh is a huge Wisconsin. So I was obviously watching Johnny Davis because he was another name that was kind of up there. It's like, oh, you know, he could be up there as a top 5 pick. And so, you know, watching him, I really fell in love with Keegan Murray. I loved his game. Again, he is a guy that I don't think the Kings made a mistake on drafting him. Whereas, you know, the couple years back, obviously we can talk about the Bagley trade and we can talk about that ad nauseum. And you know, kind of toot our own horns.
Definitely.
Or inflate our own ego, right? Where we have these big heads. But, you know, those were obviously really questioned, head-scratching moves. Obviously, to me, the Halliburton trade was a head-scratching move. But like you said, I think this roster is solid. They have some good pieces around them. They obviously brought in Monk. They brought in Kevon Herter. And so I'm excited for this team. I'm excited for this team. And I think Keegan Murray will potentially be up there, like you said, for Rookie of the Year. And so I have to go with solid offseason. Again, I want to see a little bit more. I'm not sure if they're necessarily a playoff team or even a play-in team, but they're definitely close in getting to that spot. I still think that they're one piece away. And I'm not a huge guy. I'm not a huge De'Aaron Fox guy. But if they can add someone else to this roster, maybe in the next year or two, things could be looking pretty nice for the Sacramento Kings team and go back to where they were in those early 2000 series against the Lakers. That's what I want to see from the Kings again. So
solid too. I think so far they're the best solid offseason we've seen. Last thing for this team too. You know me, Bernie. I have no intel. I don't know anybody in the league. It's more just I read the tea leaves. I listen and I watch a lot of NBA stuff. I read everything for every team. All right. Honestly, think there was a chance Detroit would have taken Keegan Murray at 5.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what forced Sacramento's hand. And I think that at the moment, at the moment it happened, I held it against them very strongly that they picked Keegan Murray where they did, seeing as I thought they could have gone back and gotten him a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
However, I think in retrospect, I really think the Pistons were going to take him at 5. So if it was one of those situations where like they traded back to 6 or 7 with Portland or whatever to take Keegan Murray there, I don't think they would have gotten him. I really don't. So I've had to lessen my dislike of that pick a lot since it happened. Not only because of his performance and just like how he's looked, but just in general, from what I've seen, I think that there were other teams that were going to make that move for him.
Yeah. Okay, let's see here. You probably only have a couple minutes left, huh?
No. I sent you a message in Discord. We can finish. We can finish.
All right, sweet. Okay, what team should we go to next? Should we keep going in order, or should we go to one of your teams?
Go back.
You want
Go
to
back for now.
Okay,
Let's go back to Golden State.
Okay, let's go to the Bay Area. Let's go to the Warriors. Obviously, championship team. You could say that they have a game-changing offseason. Let me go to their roster. So this is what they signed in free agency. They obviously got Dante DiVincenzo. Actually, not a bad pickup. They got Patrick Baldwin Jr., who I like. I think he's going to be a solid guy for them. Rui Santos obviously showed out in the summer league. We'll see if he is a two-way guy where he just plays on the G League. Their losses, though, were Damian Lee, Gary Payton II, Otto Porter Jr., and Juan Toscano Anderson. So for their offseason, I think I would have to rate it a pretty solid offseason. Because I think, and we could talk about this as well. We can talk about the Draymond Green contract extension situation. A lot of people are wondering, is he going to get that? Because that's what he wants. He wants a max contract extension with the Golden State Warriors. And the question now becomes for the Golden State Warriors moving forward. And obviously the owner, not a huge fan of wanting to pay the luxury tax. It seems like they're trying to close that down, trying to close that window of spending that much money. I think this is the Warriors. I think next year is the last chance for the Golden State Warriors to win another championship before the owner decides to shut it all down. And so I think they need to
go with the youth movement in general.
Yeah, just go youth and say, okay, look, I love you, Draymond. I love you, Clay. Well, more so Draymond, I think. But I don't think we're going to give you a contract extension because we're looking to kind of go to the next chapter in our NBA ownership career. So I think it's a solid offseason in terms of what they did for now. The question for them now becomes in the future for me. Like, what moves do they make? Do they sign these guys? I mean, what's your take on it? I know I've been taking up the room a little bit too much, but what's your take on them?
Oh, man, I know I keep saying this for a lot of them, but I think that this one's kind of tough too because I think they lost a lot of the things that made them a special team last season. I shouldn't say that. That's overstating it. Let's go. I think they might be the new top of solid just because you have to put them there, like inherently because of winning the championship.
True.
Start with the good things. I like DiVincenzo for this team. I like what he brings. I think he fits into the scheme really well. He's a nice imitation of their offense when they're off the court in Steph and Clay, right? Just a 3-point. And DiVincenzo honestly is a little underrated. He's been kind of important when he's been healthy for the teams he's been on. The thing I actually really like for this team was I really like that Patrick Baldwin Jr. up in the draft, just where they got him, the pedigree of him as a player. Like he was like a top 5 recruit coming out of high school, wasn't he?
Yeah, I mean he was supposed to be in the top
number
3,
5.
top 4. Yeah,
he might have been like the number 5 recruit. That is just always a W. When you're a really good team that develops players well, and you can get a guy like that who underperformed in college. Need him. You have so many other young players that are, developing that if he works, he works. If not, so be it, right? You only spent the 28 pick on him,
Yeah.
Just think losing Payton II is the big one, right? And they could never have re-signed him on the contract that the Blazers signed him. It's impossible for this team. So
yeah.
Sense you can't fault them, but it's also he was a big part of this team. You saw how they reacted when he got hurt in that one series. Who was that against?
I think it was Dylan Brooks, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes. Dylan Brooks in the Memphis series, right? That was a big loss, right? And they all acted that way because he was so important to their team, and it showed. Like their defense was seriously not as good when he wasn't out there. That's how important he was. He changed the whole dynamic for them. So,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Otto Porter Jr., another guy that they probably just couldn't have re-signed. I don't know. That's pretty tough, but dude, I don't know. I'm kind of tempted to put him back up to good at the bottom of good just because they have all their guys that just won the championship. You know, they haven't
Yeah.
done anything crazy. If they let's say tomorrow they sign Draymond to a max, dude, I think you'd have to put him down 2 tiers. I would put him at mid at that point because I think signing Draymond at this point in his career to a max is like you just have to own the fact that this is like a you've been here forever type of situation, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's not worth a max. He's just not. I know he showed out in the last few games of the finals, but he was like borderline unplayable up to that point. So
Yeah.
you cannot forget those things. And I know that teams as smart as the Warriors don't forget those things, but
Mm-hmm.
I think you have to give them a good just because they're bringing back the same team that just won the championship. That's good enough for good, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I have to agree with. I mean, then I'll ask you this: like, are you on the owner side where where the owner is kind of tired of paying the luxury tax? I mean, are you on the side where you're saying I'm not gonna re-sign Draymond Green? I might not try to re-sign Klay Thompson. Are you in that camp?
Dude, I would. It's such a boo-hoo. You know, boo-hoo. Like that's what you get. You're dynasty. Like by all accounts, in the modern era, this is the dynasty of the
Yeah.
2010s and leading into the 20s. Dynasty ever in any sport or in the history of sports is expensive by the standards of whatever that league is at the moment, right? You don't have a dynasty without paying guys like they're the best. That's why you're a dynasty. So
Yeah.
this is what happens, man. This is what happens, and I think that they've had a lot of out opportunity throughout
Yeah.
the years. You know, they've had plenty of opportunities to get off of these guys' contracts at good points, at points where they
Mhm.
looked like they were down in their careers. They didn't, and they just won a championship. So I would say I'm gonna be a little mean here. I would just say shut up. Like, greedy can you be? You have the best team in the league. You've won the most championships in the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
It should cost the most. It should. If it didn't cost the most to be that good, point of the bad teams trying, you know,
Yeah.
we would have no. That's when we get into that whole. It's a word that people like to use a few years ago, parity in the league, right? We don't really
Yeah.
talk about that anymore, but that's when you get to a league that has no parity. Like there is no parity in a league where the best team over a 10-year span doesn't cost the most. So
Yeah.
go with it, man. You're the Warriors.
Yeah. I mean, and the other option too is you just tell the league, hey, let's go with the hard cap salary then. And I'm sure they would hate that because then you can't re-sign all those guys and you'd have to get rid of your Draymond Greens, your Thompsons, and just kind of be a one.
Well, and this is a longer conversation for another day too, but just like short, like it's the ultimate boohoo because you know you have this collective bargaining agreement coming up. You're about to make revenue out the wazoo in like 2 years. So just suck it up and own it and keep your good team and go into that collective bargaining agreement as the best team in the league and get your money back then. You're as rich as it comes. So just deal with it or get rid of Draymond. It's that simple.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, last thing. I'm
okay,
sorry. I just thought of one more thing. At the end of the
day,
day, you don't need to pay Draymond to still be classified as one of the best teams in the league right now. You could send him to Atlanta, wherever. I don't even care. Anywhere in the league, right?
Mm-hmm.
Your team is still legitimately one of the best teams in the league by a standard of you have all of these assets to go get anybody on a better contract than Draymond on a max. Go do it, you know? Like situations where it seems like they're just kind of bullied by their superstars, and rather than blame the superstars for wanting more money than maybe they're worth, rather blame the situation that the league is putting them in, which is really not a bad situation to begin with. So shut up.
All right, let's move on to the Houston Rockets. Obviously making no moves in free agency, but they did get Sterling Brown. They got Trey Burke, Marquise Chris, and Boban Marjanovic from a trade. Via the draft, they got Jabari Smith, Tari Eason, who I really like, Ty Washington Jr., another good player. that they brought in. They lost Queen, they waived John Wall, Christian Wood obviously traded to the Mavericks, and of course they have these free agents. For the Houston Rockets, if I was to give them a grade, I'd probably say it's a mid offseason because I just think that they're still so young. I think this is the time now where they need to start thinking about adding some more players of the older variety, just to kind of ease the youngsters into the league. Again, this team is going to be an exciting team to watch, but I need to see more progression from some of these guys. Jabari Smith did not leave me with high hopes in that sense, as like being the guy to take over. This is obviously going to be Jalen Green's team. Sengun's going to be a good player for them. But I think Tari Eason as an energy hustle guy, I love that pickup for them. Obviously watched him out in the Seattle area. I think he'll be a good player for them. So I'm excited from that aspect. But in terms of will they do anything this season? Probably not. They'll probably be the same, either second to last or third to last team in the West. And so I think for the Rockets, it's a mid off season.
I think a little bit higher of it, but I wouldn't argue too much. Like I would put them in solid just because, again, my standard I keep going by is like, do you understand the timeline of your best players? Are you forcing something, or are you not understanding the quality of players you have on your team? And I think they understand. Like, kind of like the way they're building this team with Sengun is kind of your more traditional center. Jabari Smith is a really big power forward who can kind of defensively almost play a center. Like he's so big and long, he can almost do that and cover some of the other spots for Sengun. But Tari Eason, again, like I might not be as high on him as you are or some other people, but he is by all accounts going to be a really terrific player in the league for a long time. Like just even defensively alone, he's going to have his value in the league.
Yeah.
Getting a player like Ty Washington at 29, like another guy that fell dramatically from where his pedigree in high school had him. Mm-hmm. And there is something to be said about Kentucky guards who underperform and go later in the first round.
Yeah.
It is a thing that happens in the NBA. And whether that's Calipari's coaching style or just the way that Kentucky is run, or maybe run improperly with having too many prospects, like I think that there's a chance in which people look at Ty Washington, maybe not as good as Tyrese Maxey or even somebody like Quickly, but more in the Quickly sense than Maxey. Like, wow, this guy, I can't believe he was 29th. What happened at Kentucky with him? And yeah. His skill set is definitely better than the 29th overall pick. So I like it, I like it. You get rid of John Wall, you get rid of Christian Wood, something that both of us thought should have happened last season. Mm-hmm. You only get younger. So I like it. I would say solid, but I'm fine at the top of mid.
Top of mid, okay.
I would put them ahead of Chicago, that's for sure. Like if you were to compare those two 1-to-1, I think they had a much better offseason than Chicago.
Okay. Let's move on to the Indiana Pacers. Didn't really do anything in free agency, but they did make a couple of draft picks and trades. They obviously got Aaron Naismith and Daniel Theis from that Malcolm Brogdon trade. Via the draft, they got themselves Benedict Mathurin, Andrew Nembhard, Hugo Besson, Kendall Brown. I'm not sure if I said Besson right.
I like Hugo Besson. You did. I like
Besson. Him. And then obviously losing some free agents. I think that this was a mid off season. I would go mid again for them. I love the pickup of Benedict Mathurin. I think that he is a really good player. I think he's going to really change the room for the Pacers. But obviously, like you said, they're talking about timelines. They are on a different timeline than most of these other teams, and so they're obviously not going to try to make the big flashy free agency signings. It seems like Larry Bird is stepping down from making decisions for the Indiana Pacers, and so this is going to be a whole new front office situation where they're going to decide what they're going to do. And so I'm going to go with mid from the fact that they did address some needs. I think they got Andrew Nembhard as well as a backup guard. They got Benedict Mathurin, again, a forward that can do a lot of great things. And so they're kind of starting over again. They still need to get rid of Miles Turner, in my opinion, and I believe Buddy Hield, just so they can kind of now officially continue the reboot, which they're trying to start. And so that's why I give them a mid off season.
Yeah. I like this one a little bit more than you, but I can't deny it's probably mid. I would argue that if that Ayton contract that they had sent him and he signed, if that had ended up working out for this team, I would actually put them in good, personally.
Yeah.
that not ending up getting him, which you can't fault them at all. They sent him a I thought a very reasonable contract for a 23-year-old former first overall pick who's been to the finals. Like I think that contract was mega reasonable. If they had gotten him, I would have to put them good, but they didn't. So
yeah.
Benedict Mathurin though, who by all accounts, like one thing I actually really like about Benedict Mathurin a lot is it's kind of recreating, like he could in potential alone recreate that situation where they had Oladipo, where he really started to show out with Indiana.
Yeah.
Just because I think skill set wise they're really pretty similar in like their attitude as far as like dominating physically, like on the court. I think they're both capable of doing that. I like it, but it's one of those things where it has to be mid just because they didn't go up at all, really. Yeah. They're still going to be one of the worst teams in the East. It's just I like their youth quite a bit.
Yeah. Should we move on? LA Clippers?
Go for it. Clippers.
Right, let's move on to the Clippers. Obviously, they're getting back Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, more so Kawhi Leonard from that injury that he had. Free agency, they added John Wall. And then via the trade, they got Diabate. Musa Diabate, and then of course they lost Hartenstein to the Knicks. So again, didn't really do too much in the offseason, but they did get John Wall. And so if I were to go with kind of a grade for this, I would have to give them to one of the close to worst off seasons, in my opinion.
Wow. That's pretty harsh.
The reason why it's harsh is because I feel like for the Clippers, they're stuck. They're stuck in a room. They're stuck in a situation where they need to decide what they're going to do, try to get some role players to go along with both Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Again, I think that those two guys are solid players, but they haven't done anything, in my opinion, for me, to warrant, especially the Clippers. I know they added John Wall. He's going to be a solid player for them, but is he going to be the John Wall that we got even 3 or 4 years ago? Right? You know, this dude was drafted in 2010. I would love to see him play similarly to what he was in DC. I'm not sure if we're going to get that. Shooting has never been his strong suit. And so for me, they need a lot more role players, a lot more guys to do some stuff. I have to give them a close to worst.
Disagree on this one again a little bit. And it's the same. It's funny that they're right next to each other because I would still say that I would put the Nuggets a lot higher than close to worst personally. Like I was saying, I think it's very similar to the Nuggets situation for the Clippers, right? By all accounts, if they're healthy, this is a championship caliber team, right? Me, personally, they're one of my teams I'm looking out. I know there's been a lot of like betting action on the Clippers coming into this season so far too. A lot of people really like the Clippers coming in. And I'm kind of with them. Like I think this is a good example of a team that last season was not representative of what they are, really. You know, like clearly you're missing one of the best players in the league with Kawhi. You missed one of the other best players in the league for a big bulk of the season with Paul George being injured. So I like the addition of John Wall. I like the things he said. Understanding he doesn't need to be the Batman, I think was his quote. Like he doesn't need to be the Batman in the situation. If he really embraces that and is showing off the skills that made him such a special guard in the first place, which I know a lot of the things that made him special were his athleticism, his speed was just, shockingly, he was so fast. But he legitimately has always been a good passer. He's been a good just court general. He just other parts of his game that kind of took away from that a little bit. Like he was offensively their best player too for a while. So if he goes into this stage of his career knowing that he's not that guy offensively anymore, but he can still help Kawhi and Paul George, I think that this team's pretty dangerous. So I would say mid just because there's not enough to put it higher, but it's definitely not bad, I don't think.
Okay, so is that one of the teams you move up? Are you moving them up to mid?
I would want to move Denver up before I move them up, so I don't know if I can move them up. Okay. Denver up, and then we put, like, the Clippers cannot be behind Brooklyn, to me, personally. Like, I know maybe we're not doing the rankings per tier as much as maybe I think we are, but just the fact that Brooklyn, and, like, I don't think it's as bad as Brooklyn or Dallas is, Like, they didn't lose anything critical, and they didn't necessarily add anything critical either, so I like Nembhard too, actually, going back to Indiana, Sean. I like Nembhard a lot. I talked about him in the Summer League. I thought he looked awesome in Summer League. He was a guy that actually moved in the middle of Summer League, didn't he? Move teams, I think. Could be wrong, though.
All right, let's move on to the Los Angeles Lakers, the city
Oh my gosh.
the city of turmoil as it pertains to Jeannie Buss talking, whatever else is going on for them. So the LA Lakers, free agency, they signed a lot of mid-tier guys, but they could potentially help them out in the long haul. They've got Troy Brown Jr., Thomas Bryant, Damian Jones, Juan Toscano Anderson, and Lonnie Walker. Via the draft, they got Max Christie. Nothing via trade yet, but they lost Malik Monk as a signing. And so far, they have free agents of Melo, Ariza, Augustine. They have a bunch of the older guys. And so, with that being said, the Lakers, they are a team that I would have to say is pretty similar to the Brooklyn Nets in the sense that I think that there's one more move that they can make in order for them to be a championship team. Obviously, they kept Russell Westbrook. They've kept Anthony Davis. LeBron James is still there. And it just seems to me what they're trying to do is, and obviously they had the phone call where they huddled together and said, hey, we're doing this together. But if we had to rank kind of the offseason so far for them, it is definitely close to worst. Just because of the fact that they have yet to sign players that they need to. Again, the offseason is still here. The season hasn't officially started yet. But if we were ranking it right now as of July 27th, 2022, it's definitely one of the close to worst.
Yeah, I would argue of all the teams we've talked about so far, like this is right there neck and neck with Brooklyn and Charlotte. Like the pretty horrendous offseason for the Lakers. And it goes down to like not even just the obvious stuff. Like the obvious stuff, let me just get it out of the way, right? Not doing anything with the Westbrook situation is borderline the biggest L any team has took in a few years.
Yeah.
Right. This Westbrook situation is like one of the worst things that's been happening in the league for a while. It seems to only get uglier every news article that comes out from behind the scenes. So already take him down a huge peg for that. That's just a bad situation. But then let's talk about like Lonnie Walker the fourth got way too much money. Didn't he get the full mid-level exception from the Lakers?
I believe so, yes.
That's too much, man. Like maybe I've watched more of Lonnie Walker the fourth than other people, and I actually really liked him coming out of Miami. Dude, he just is not that. He's not that good. He's not valuable to that level. Especially like, I heard somebody else say this. I don't remember who it was. I wish I'd give him credit, but they were saying that like they were shocked to see that Lonnie Walker got the mid level and Juan Toscano Anderson didn't get that. They would have thought it would be the reverse. And to me, that's the perfect way to think about it. I would have given Juan Toscano Anderson that mid level before I gave it to Lonnie Walker. So that's pretty tough. But they ended up getting Juan Toscano Anderson on a pretty friendly contract. Just don't really like these guys enough to think that they're going to change anything. Like Troy Brown Jr. doesn't change anything. Thomas Bryant doesn't really change anything. Damian Jones, I mean, what are you talking about? You know, and let's go with the guy they lost to in Malik Monk. I thought he was like one of the bright points of the team last season. Like his chemistry with LeBron, it just worked with Malik Monk. And I think losing him, even though they couldn't have signed him for as much as the Kings did, I believe.
Yeah.
I thought that was an L. This is a really ugly offseason. But again, like you said, it's not as hopeless, I think Brooklyn is. I think there's still a chance that they can go do something, even though I think the chances are pretty slim. I would argue just getting rid of Russell Westbrook in any circumstance is a bigger W than anything Charlotte could do.
Wow.
Getting him off the team, at least you have LeBron and Anthony Davis. Like, I don't think that's as bad as what Charlotte's done to their squad. So
yeah,
it's definitely not good. This is, if you're a Lakers fan, this has got to be a pretty painful offseason. But I don't know. It's not hopeless, man. It's not hopeless. It's pretty close. It's pretty close.
All right, let's move on to the next team. We got the Memphis Grizzlies, another one of Sean's teams.
Grizzlies.
The Grizz. Nothing via free agency, but they did get Danny Green from the 76ers. Via the draft, they got La Riviera, They got David Roddy. I butchered that
Dude,
name
I
out.
like that name. La
La
Riviera is
Riviera.
way better.
Jake
Jake LaRavia.
Jake LaRavia.
La Riviera, dude.
Let me just say,
He's gonna get a sponsorship.
La Riviera. We got David Rodri, Kenny Chandler, who I like, Vince Williams Jr. And then they lost Kyle Anderson, who went to the Timberwolves. They lost D'Anthony Melton. This, to me, like their offseason so far, it's not necessarily the best, but it is not necessarily the worst. So I'd have to say it's a very mid offseason for the Grizzlies, just because of the fact that I think that this team has some decent pieces to help them try to get to the next level that they need to, right? You know, John Morant's going to get a year older. The only concern, the thing that sucks so far from the offseason is that Jared Jackson Jr. is going to be injured once again. Is not going to be there to work and get better this summer. And then it's going to continue for them to be in that mid tier of like, okay, Jared Jackson Jr. can never stay healthy, so we can never get that full offseason where he grows. And so I'd have to give them, like I said, a mid offseason, nothing too crazy.
I like Memphis's offseason. I would put them in solid, personally. Of understanding the timeline. I keep saying that I sound like a broken record, I'm sure. But I think it's critical. I really think that is a critical function of running an NBA team, especially nowadays with how good the league is.
Mm-hmm.
Understanding the timeline of where your player's at, not rushing anything, putting people in bad contract situations. Dude, that is really a major part of the game, in terms of roster construction. So I have to take into consideration that off season, really, but this off season in particular, where every team is just so good. The thing with Memphis is I really liked their draft a lot. I really like Jake La Riviera, LaRavia himself. Did you see the drama with Jake LaRavia? Did you see the thing that happened with him leading into the draft?
Wasn't it that they thought he was a lot older, so he fell in the draft, and then as soon as they found out he was like, what, 20?
Yeah, there was an error on like Google about his age. I think it said he was 23 and he's actually 19. Dude, he's legitimately a talented player, and he's a great role player for this team. He's a guy that is probably going to get some minutes for this team. Just for his three-point shooting alone, he's probably going to get minutes, and he's a big kid too.
LaRavia.
I really like David Roddy leading into the draft, and I loved like his frame and the way he could kind of bang down low if you have somebody like Jaren Jackson Jr., who's always getting hurt. David Roddy is a great player to have. And one player that we haven't even mentioned that they got undrafted is Kenny Lofton Jr. We're both huge Kenny Lofton Jr. people, and get him for free, basically, like the equivalent of free. He's really a very similar player to David Roddy. I would actually argue that like he's probably more skilled than David Roddy is, and they picked him 23rd. And I like both those guys a lot. So long term, I think that this was a huge W. One thing, and this is why I bring up the timeline with Memphis, I don't think that this is a championship team this season. I didn't think they were a championship team last season either. By understanding you're not and not forcing anything, like, for example, going out and getting KD, like they were one of the teams that got brought up a lot when the KD thing first dropped. Like, Memphis, go get this guy. Me, that's a bigger mistake in terms of team building than Jaylen Brown getting traded from the Celtics. Like, these dudes are so young. The timeline of a player like Kevin Durant and John Morant couldn't be any more different, realistically, know. So I like it just in terms of they were already going up, and this is another way for them to continue going up. So I give it a thumbs up.
All right, let's move on to the Miami Heat. The Heat. Nothing via free agency.
With this one.
Nothing
I got quick thoughts for the Heat.
All right. Yeah. Go ahead.
These Miami Heat fans aren't going to like me. I think that this has been an L. I think this offseason has been pretty weak for them. I would really like to pick the 27th pick, Nikola Jovic. Yeah, I think he's legitimately, he should have gone higher than 27th in the draft, in my opinion. I think he's too skilled, too big, too offensively talented long-term to have gone that low. People are going to regret that one. Besides that, though, I really don't like their offseason. I thought they overperformed in the playoffs last season. I know people have been saying that since the bubble when they went to the finals, right? I really thought they overperformed. I did not believe in them going into the playoffs very much for the reason that they ended up losing for, which is they don't have enough offense on that team, like consistent offense. Showed getting played off the court in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Celtics. Like he just couldn't do it. I mean, he's defensively too much of a liability and too inconsistent offensively. And so far this offseason, all they've done is they're going to trade a bunch of people or be in rumors to trade for just about everybody and not make any of the trades, you know?
Yeah.
And when you see the things happen, like what's happening with Boston, with Jaylen Brown putting the SMH tweet out, right, about being in the rumors for KD. That energy is the same for every player everywhere in the league, right? Some people very rarely understand 100% that it's a business. End of the day, feelings get hurt. People don't like to be in rumors, right? And by all accounts, Pat Riley called out Tyler Hero immediately after they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals, and Bam Adebayo has been in just about every trade this offseason, potentially.
Yeah.
So I think that this is a big L, man. I think Heat culture is probably going to take a little bit of a dip. I think they haven't done anything to get better. If anything, losing PJ Tucker is a little bit of an L too. Could not have signed. I mean, Philly signed PJ Tucker for way too much. We'll talk about that in a little bit. That contract is ridiculous. But even then, losing him is still a loss for Miami. They needed guys like that. So I don't know. Jimmy is a year older. That the play style that Jimmy has is physically taxing over time. So I think that this team is worse. That's my metric for how I rank these teams. I think that this team is worse than it was last offseason. And realistically, it's not like they lost anybody. It's just that they got older, and I don't think anybody got better.
So you put them in close to worse? Worse?
That might be harsh. That might be too harsh. Put them at the bottom of mid, personally.
All right, bottom of mid is where they go. And let's move on to the next team, the Milwaukee Bucks.
Oh, yeah.
Because I'm no B. Jennings. Here we go. They got okay, that was really cringe. The free agency, they got Joe Ingles. They got Joe
I kept going with it. I'll let you go. I'll let you have that one.
They go with Joe Ingles. They got Marjon Beauchamp, who great pickup. I love that pickup in the draft. And they didn't lose anybody. So I think for me, I'm giving them a good offseason. I'm going good offseason for them. Because again, they are a team that had dealt with injuries with Chris Middleton, so they had to just rely on Giannis and Drew Holiday. But now that they're kind of back together again, the band's back together. You add Marjon, who's kind of like a scrappy guy, can also hit some good shots. Played in the Ignite League. You brought in Joe Ingles, kind of a playmaking shot creator in his own right. I know he's coming off an ACL tear, but man. You replace some of these guys like Bembry, Wigginton, Nwora, and obviously PJ Tucker from 2 years ago. You bring in Joe Ingles. That's a good offseason. You bring in a great player in Joe Ingles. You bring in a great young player in Marjon. I think you're looking pretty solid. So I'm gonna go with a good offseason for them.
Yeah, see, I would say, Bernie, you need to keep the same energy with all these teams. I would compare this team very heavily to the Clippers in Denver, right? Like teams that underperformed in terms of like what the expectation was in the playoffs last season, right? And they didn't need to do anything crazy. Like, by all accounts, I picked Celtics going into the playoffs last offseason just because I thought the momentum was there and it was, not to pat myself on the back too much. The problem is I think Milwaukee is a better team. I really do. Yeah. I think Milwaukee is the best team in the league. I thought they were the best team in the league last season. And it's funny coming from the 2021 where they win the finals, win the championship, and people are kind of questioning whether or not it was a deserved championship. And then the next season, it really felt like they probably were the best team last year if Chris Middleton didn't get hurt. So much exactly what you said, man. Like, honestly, I like Marjon Beauchamp a lot. Getting him at 24 is a nice pickup. He's going to give you some nice minutes off the bench for this first couple seasons. And then, honestly, getting Joe Ingles for literally nothing. If Joe Ingles comes back and is 75% Joe Ingles from Utah, that is a valuable player to have on this Utah team by all accounts. Like, not the worst defensive player, and he's definitely going to get you a couple threes. So dude, I like it, man. You have Giannis. You can't even fault this team. I think that this is tempted to put this in like top of good, but we'll just put him in good in general. I agree.
All right, let's go to Minnesota. So Minnesota via free agency got Anderson, Brian Forbes, Austin Rivers, Rudy Gobert, and through the draft they got Wendell Moore Jr., Josh Minott, and Matteo Spagnolo. That's kind of.
Ask you a question before we dive too much into
who is Matteo Spagnolo?
Minnesota. Who is Spagnolo? Steve Spagnolo's son. No, I was going to ask you: is this team the most divisive? Do you think that they're the most divisive of all the teams we're going to talk about, like in terms of grading their offseason? Because they have the biggest move. So I think they're probably the biggest question mark for everybody. I think that people's opinions on this one would swing pretty dramatically.
I would agree with you there. I think that this is probably the most polarizing one, just from the fact that they traded for Rudy Gobert. They've obviously drafted the guys that they did. They got Kyle Anderson. They got a lot of pieces in. Plus, you bring back D'Lo, Cat, Anthony Edwards. I mean, you're running it back with basically the same squad plus some. So I think that this is going to be a very interesting kind of offseason to grade. So I think you are right. It is divisive because some people rate Rudy Gobert as top class. Some people rate him as trash. And also, Kyle Anderson, a lot of people were like, I'm not really sure about that guy. And so if I were to pick kind of like where Minnesota was, and I know I'm going away from your question a little bit, I would say
you answered it.
Minnesota has a game-changing offseason.
Wow. And let me question one more thing, because I think that the wording of game-changing offseason might be a little misleading, because it could be game-changing just in general.
A good way?
I would
good
agree.
Way or bad way?
I would agree with you. It could be bad too. Like, by a lot of standards, game-changing offseason could go both ways. Like, it could be game-changingly bad, or maybe it's just unknown, but it's game-changing. You know what I mean? It could be. It's definitely going to change everything for this team.
Should I do championship offseason? Then would that be a better name?
Ooh. Yeah. I would say championship offseason. Do you think that it's a championship offseason? Because I was the one that had the dramatic reaction live in stream when the trade was announced. I had the dramatic reaction of saying, I think that this is a huge trade for them and puts them in title contention. Right?
Yeah.
That was like 5 minutes after the trade. And honestly, I kind of still feel that way. I really do. Like, I still think the trade is kind of terrible in terms of how much they had to give up. Like, pretty insane amount of value to give up for Rudy Gobert. But here's the big difference, and something that I don't really do. I don't understand what it is about current fans, and maybe this has just been a thing forever. Maybe it really has. Maybe any sport, just people are dramatic because they love the sport, they love their team, and they hate certain players and love certain players, right? NBA basketball is so much about fit. It is so much about fit. And I think that this fit is perfect. I think it's so great. Like, I'm huge on this trade for this team in the sense that I think a lot of the things that Rudy Gobert has always been faulted for masked by the team that he's now on.
Yeah.
And I have disagreed about this in the past, the fit with Utah, like what the construction of that team was. I personally was of the opinion they never had good enough perimeter defenders to have a player like Rudy Gobert be your center point of defense.
Yeah.
This team, the difference is you have a guy like Anthony Edwards who is physically, he is on another level. I mean, he is basically the guard equivalent of Giannis right now, to me personally. On a physical, like you're comparing him to the peers at his position, he is physically that different than the rest of the guards, I would say. He's also 21 years old, and he's already, I would argue, a superstar. And this is one of those things where maybe they're not understanding the timeline. Maybe maybe they're pushing it a little too soon. Like, is Anthony Edwards really ready to go out for a big swing type move like Rudy Gobert?
Mm-hmm.
I'd say that there's probably a lot of people who would argue no, he's not. I am all in. Like, I don't know if, other than Evan Mobley, I don't know if there's been a guy in the last 4 seasons. We have to talk Luka. Like, you and I were huge on Luka, but barring Luka, barring Mobley, I don't know if I've ever been as all in as I am with Anthony Edwards. I see a guy is a championship caliber player, a guy that is going to elevate an entire team's persona, their culture, their attitude, their winning mentality. He is that guy. If you pair him with two bigs who perfectly counter each other's skills, in the sense that, Cat has never been a very good defender. And we've argued about Cat ad nauseum before, how good Cat is, whether or not his potential is as high as people think it is. Cat, this is now where we're going to see the perfect version of Cat. A version of Cat where he doesn't need to be the defensive center point, the anchor of a team, be a true center. He doesn't need to do that. He has Rudy Gobert now. Now he can be out on the outside, spacing the floor, doing the things he's good at. Team, and by the metrics of our tier list, right? I would not have said they were a championship caliber team before this trade, but with having Rudy Gobert, the ceiling is just so much higher. The ceiling is so much higher, and getting a 1 seed or a 2 seed, regular season, this team is going to be insanely good.
Yeah.
Not saying 100% they're going to win the championship, but they're going to have a really good record, and I think that this team will benefit greatly from having home court advantage if they end up getting that far. So I agree with you, man. This is game-changing. I think the trade is bad. Gave up way too much, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the offseason at large. Did they make their team better? They did, 1,000%.
All right, let's move on to the Pelicans. The Pelicans did a pretty decent job, I thought, this NBA offseason. Didn't do anything in the free agency, didn't do anything via trade, but they did get some great players in the draft. They got Dyson Daniels, who I like, EJ Liddell, another good player that I liked, and then they got Carlo Matkovic. And so, like, if I were to grade the Pelicans, I think for the Pelicans, their moves more so rely on the guys coming in this year, right? When you got guys like Alvarado coming back from a good season, kind of the energy guy, kind of brought that hustle to what the Pelicans need in the NBA playoffs. You bring back the head coach, Willie Green, who I really like. And so I think if I were to give the Pelicans an offseason grade, I'd probably have to give them a mid offseason. Not from the fact that I think that they're a mid team, but just from the fact that, they added some good players in the draft. Let's see if those players, especially with guys like Zion Williamson coming back from injury, signing that max contract extension. You got Brandon Ingram, in trade rumors as well. The Kevin Durant stuff. They're like, oh, well, maybe he can go to New Orleans as a player. But to me, I think more so than anything else, I'm excited to see how the Pelicans play this coming season. I think they're going to be obviously a playoff team. The question for me, like I said, does Dyson Daniels get them over the hump? Because I think they're still missing that point guard that they desperately need.
I would say this is a solid offseason. I think one thing you didn't mention that was a huge question mark like a year ago was the Zion contract extension. Whether or not he would be the first person to ever say he didn't want it and leave the team, the case may be, demand a trade, whoever, right? He turned it around the last half of last season in such a way that I mean, honestly, if the Celtics hadn't done what they did, they would have been the most shocking team of the year. They were atrocious for the first half of the season, and we roasted this team, and fully so. They deserved it, but they turned it around, and I think just the fact that they did enough to convince Zion to sign that max extension, whether that means he's going to be there long term, who knows nowadays? We don't know that. They did it. They got him to sign. Got Dyson Daniels at number 8 overall, who very well could be this year's Josh Giddey, where people looking like, dang, dude, this guy is so good. I like this offseason a lot. Like, it goes on with what we've been talking about. Did they get better? They got better in the season last year dramatically, and they re-signed their best player and got another guy who's going to start for them in Dyson Daniels. So this team a lot, man. I actually am excited to watch them. So I'd say solid, personally.
Yeah. So we'll move them up to solid. Let's move on to your team now, the New York Knickerbockers. Knicks free agency was a huge success for them. They got Jalen Brunson and Isaiah Hartenstein. In the draft, they got Trevor Keels. They obviously lost Alec Burks, Taj Gibson, Nerlens Noel, and Kemba Walker. And Aracano is on the free agency, so we don't know if he's going to re-sign with them. The Knicks, I'll let you go first, Pete. This is your team. I'll let you go first.
All right, I mean, I would say I'm a pretty fair critic. Would you agree? I don't think I'm necessarily the biggest homer of all time. I've never been one to necessarily just say
you've had some homer picks in the last couple of them, just from the last offseason.
Have I? Maybe a little.
You're Fournier and Kemba Walker.
Yeah, I did like those signings. I'll be honest with you. Being said, I think that this offseason is. I would say this is a good offseason. I really would. I definitely don't know what you could look at and say this was bad.
Mm-hmm.
Realistically, last year was a disaster for this team.
Yeah.
Last year was an absolute unmitigated disaster. They all underperformed. The team took major steps back throughout the whole season. And in general, things just didn't go the Knicks' way.
Mm-hmm.
But lo and behold, they still had built a culture enough to convince a player like Jalen Brunson, whatever people think of Jalen Brunson. I mean, I've seen so many people say like this is one of the biggest overpays they've ever seen. You don't watch basketball or look at basketball contracts enough if you think Jalen Brunson's 4 for 110 or it's 4 for 104. If you think that that's one of the biggest overpays you've ever seen, I dare you to go look at the 2017 offseason or 2016 offseason. Dare you to go look at that because this is about as reasonable as it gets nowadays. I mean, he's like the 17th or 18th highest paid point guard in the league. He's probably better than the 17th or 18th best point guard in the league. Maybe. I mean, that's maybe another longer conversation, but it's a very friendly team contract and long-term deal. Mm-hmm. Speaking terms, right? Because the last 2 years are not guaranteed. Isaiah Hartenstein is a really solid backup big. Like, very popular name. People don't really know him, but he is a skilled dude. And he was actually, like, we didn't actually talk about that enough for the Clippers. He's kind of a loss for the Clippers. Maybe that is a good reason to keep them where they're at. Because he was solid and they really lost him for nothing. So getting him on a super friendly contract too for the Knicks was a W. You cannot understate how official it is to this team to get off the contracts they did. And really, they didn't give up much to get off those contracts. I mean, the biggest question mark, and maybe this is the biggest thing that's going to hold them back from being good, and maybe I'll actually convince myself here that it's just solid. It's going to depend on what they do with that cap space. If they do nothing and they traded a first-round pick to clear cap space for just Jalen Brunson, I mean, that's kind of an L. Why did you do that? You didn't need to do it, I think at the end of the day, I'd be very shocked if they walk away with nothing. And then the question is, are they going to give up like a historic amount of picks and everything to go get somebody like Donovan Mitchell? I mean, that's kind of dealer's choice. That's not too far off the conversation we just had for Minnesota. So I'll go down to solid. I think this is a solid offseason. They addressed their biggest need literally for the last 25 years, which is a true point guard. And they got a backup center. They re-signed Mitchell Robinson on a nice team-friendly contract, in my opinion, 4 for $60. I like this offseason. Solid.
Yeah, I'd go solid too. Again, I think the Brunson thing, like you said, I think a lot of people are blowing that out of proportions. Jalen Brunson, solid point guard for the Mavericks. They could have signed him for a lot less. They were dumb, did not do that. And so for the Knicks to get him and just kind of really solidify that point guard position, like you said, they've been trying to search for that solid point guard since we've been kind of fans since high school, middle school even, ever since the mellow days of.
I mean, literally forever. Like the last player of his caliber to play point guard for this team, and I'm not kidding. I think it's Raymond Felton.
Raymond Felton. Eek.
That says a lot.
And so I think that was a good pickup. I would say it's solid from that perspective. But other than that, I still think that, whether what you ever think of, Julius Randle, it might be time to look to see if you can trade him away. Or, maybe if you're a Randle guy, you're looking to see if you can add a piece to help him. Because again, you have RJ Barrett. We're still trying to figure out what he is in this league. Are people excited about him? Are people kind of, has the RJ hype kind of died down a bit? And so that's something that the Knicks have to discuss within themselves. And so for the Knicks, that's the biggest question mark going in for next season is, do they try to use that cap space to get somebody, or are they going to go into the Tinkapalooza to get the next kid that's coming up? That again, we will be releasing a video on that relatively in the first or second week of August is when that video should be coming out.
Ooh, self promo. I like it.
So that's my next grade.
Speaking, I think this is. I mean, if you're comparing Knicks off seasons to other Knicks off seasons, this is not as bad as it gets.
Yeah,
it's not. This is definitely a step up for them.
All right, should we move on to
Oklahoma City Thunder?
All you.
Interesting team here. This is, dude, I'm really always so conflicted with Oklahoma City because I don't know if you remember this. We disagreed pretty adamantly last year on Oklahoma City. I was not a fan of their offseason last year.
Mm-hmm.
In retrospect, I've changed my mind a little bit because Giddey is a lot better than we thought he was. I thought he was going to be solid, but I just didn't like all the things they were doing in terms of just continuing to go get picks after picks after picks and not really doing anything with it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that question mark still remains for me with this team a little bit. Like, I think people give this team so much credit for something they really haven't done yet. Like in terms of going in this unique way of tanking really hard, being super young, and just accumulating assets constantly.
Mm-hmm.
Still has not led to anything necessarily, but the difference, and this is the reason why I would say they've had a good offseason, is this is finally a season where it seemed like, hey, there's a lot of young guys we like, and we're willing to just give whatever we need to go get them.
Yeah.
Luckily, they didn't have to do that with Chet. They ended up getting the second pick and getting the guy they wanted. But somebody like Ousmane Dieng, which, it's funny. We just talked about the Knicks. That's who they traded with to get Ousmane Dieng. It's a good example of what I'm talking about. You really like this guy as a prospect long term. He's almost 7 foot tall. He can do a lot of the things that is modern in the NBA right now. And what do? They say, hey, we have more picks than God. Let's go get our guy. So they give 3 firsts to get this prospect. That's a huge W. If you're a team like the Thunder with all these picks, those picks don't matter to them. They really don't. And what are you going to do with those picks? You're going to trade 15 picks to get Kevin Durant? You're not going to do that because it doesn't make any sense. So the thing is, their draft was just so good that I have to put them in a good offseason. Like, I really like both of the Jalen Williams, especially Jalen Williams without the Y, the 12th overall pick. I like him a lot. Dude, this team is going to be better than they were last offseason. That's the thing. At the end of the day, did they get better? They did get better.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I'll go ahead.
Just saying I think they got better by a lot. Like, I think Chet raises their ceiling in the next few years considerably.
Exactly. And that's the reason why I would also agree with you. It's a good offseason. They did what they needed to do in the draft. They got the players that they wanted. And so to me, as they continue their timeline of what they want, and again, there goes that word again, timeline. The timeline for the Oklahoma City Thunder is on schedule, right? There's no hiccups. The picks that they have, gotten, they fit, right? Because Chet's not supposed to be the superstar of the team. He's supposed to be kind of the guy that fills the missing piece, kind of the X factor for you. And so I think for the Oklahoma City Thunder, as they continue to develop their young guys, I know they just signed the Spurs, I believe. I can't remember. I don't know if it's coach. He's part of the coaching staff for the Spurs that kind of helped the growth of like Kawhi Leonard and other guys like him. I think Tim Duncan as well. Like the younger
I'll
guys.
look it up while you.
Yeah, I think Shams reported it. And so by signing him and getting him, I think they actually are going to be really good next season. Not saying that they're going to be playoff team or play-in team, but they're going to be competitive, and that's what you want from these young guys. And so I'm excited for the Oklahoma City Thunder moving forward. And they just had a great offseason. Again, did they do anything to where they got a superstar from a trade or a signing? No. And that's never going to happen for Oklahoma City unless they have another star player there. But
actually, okay, I found the thing. Sorry to interrupt you. So they ended up signing Chip England from Spurs. And that's, I mean, That's actually a huge, huge signing. I mean,
Yeah.
I know a lot of people are not into that kind of stuff as much as you and I are, but he is literally one of like maybe the 2 or 3 best shooting coaches in the NBA worked with, and how much their shooting has progressed in the years of working with him. That's a huge W, man. I actually didn't see that. That's awesome for them.
Yeah, so I think like by adding him and the way that they're going right now, I'm not sure that they really need those other draft picks, in my opinion. I think they have a solid roster. I think they just now need to build the depth for them, and let's see what depth they can get. So again, good offseason. I'm excited for them, and again, another league pass team to kind of monitor and see how they do.
It's one of my squads to watch a lot this year. I have a feeling I'm going to watch like a considerable amount of Oklahoma City. I'm just so. I might be the only person too where my number one thing I want to watch is I want to watch Giddey. I really do. I think he is really special, man. I think that kid is going to be. I mean, I get a lot of like tall Steve Nash from him.
Tall Steve Nash. All right. Ready to move on to the Orlando Magic?
Let's do it.
All right, Orlando Magic, nothing free agency, nothing via trade, but they did get the number 1 overall pick in Paulo Banchero, Caleb Houston, and then they obviously lost Robin Lopez, huge loss. And again, they got rid of some guys. They got rid of Michael Carter-Williams. They got rid of Dozier. Again, these are just unrestricted free agents, so they could sign again.
Guys that weren't going to play anyway.
I would have to rate their offseason as a solid offseason just because of the fact that you did get the number 1 overall pick. You got Paulo Banchero, a guy that, again, will score ad nauseum in the league. I think he was held back by Coach K, in my opinion, watching him in the Summer League. Like, that's the Paulo that I wish was playing at Duke. But obviously, the way that Coach K likes to play, they don't get those opportunities to. And so, when I watch the Orlando Magic from afar, a lot of people might put them in in good offseason, maybe even championship offseason, just from the fact that they got a guy that can be a game changer.
Maybe long term. Yeah.
But I still think that they need to make a lot more moves, and we still have yet to see what they're going to do about their point guard situation. The reason why I am stuck, not because of Jalen Suggs, but because of Cole Anthony, because and RJ Hampton, like they have 3 guys that they're deciding like what to do with, right? It just doesn't feel like they have a solid plan yet in the point guard position. So that scares me a little bit for a guy like Jalen Suggs, who didn't really play in the Summer League, who should have played, but was obviously hurt. I'm concerned that the point guard play is going to be a real scrutiny this coming season if they don't decide who's the point guard at the beginning of the season.
I think Fultz showed enough. at the end of last season. I mean, they were legitimately a much better team when Markelle got back, and like he was by all accounts very good too. Like with what he was doing in terms of maybe not number 1 overall pick good a few years ago, but that dude has just worked his butt off and kept getting better at the things that were weaknesses for him originally, and now they're his strengths. So I'm big on Fultz. I think, like you said, Suggs is a big question mark, right? I would put them in good, if not for this one, maybe a bit of a stickler thing I'm going to talk about real quick, because I think you hit a lot of good points. Just getting Banchero alone is enough to put this as one of the better off seasons. Like, to me, he was the number 1 guy in the draft, and for me, it was pretty clear that was the guy I would have taken if I had the power to make a pick like that. And I think one of the things coming out of Summer League that people talked about a lot that is super underrated with Paolo is he's a freak. Like, physically, it was all about Chet being a physical freak and some of the other guys in the draft. But Paolo is a gigantic person who is himself not like a gigantic person, One of those situations where you look at his frame and his skill set, and it is a little representative. I'm not necessarily saying he's going to be this guy, but I'm saying it is representative of like a young LeBron, like physical build and just being physically ready to go score in the league. That is very uncommon to have those things the way he does. My biggest gripe with this team was how they handled the draft in general, right? Not working out Paolo, not ever committing to doing anything. It was just all so weird, and it didn't feel like they had really any good plan. And they panicked at the end, and luckily their panic took them, I think, to the right guy to take.
Yeah.
Do a very good job on the way to get there. And imagine the leverage they could have put on some of these teams, right?
Mhm.
Leading up into the draft to say, hey, Paolo is number one guy. That's who we're taking. It's not really how they felt, which is how it seemed leading into the draft. Gotten a really big haul of stuff for that pick, if that's what they wanted to do. Retrospect, maybe Paolo was just what they wanted, the guy they wanted from the very beginning. That's who they ended up with, but they didn't act that way. And I think that they made some mistakes, like in terms of holding cards too close to their chest. Like, you have the first pick, you have all of the leverage. Make that leverage worth something and use it to your advantage. And they did the opposite of that. I thought that was a really bad choice. Would it have turned out to be any different? Would it have led to anything? Maybe not, but it was just so weird. And that alone puts me to like just solid. You know, I don't necessarily think they're very well managed, which is not surprising in terms of Orlando.
Yeah.
But like a lot of their young guys, I like the core. They're another team I'm going to be watching quite a bit of this season.
Yeah, so let's see. Leave in the comment opinions down below, or leave your comments and opinions down below. What do you guys think of the Orlando Magic's offseason? Are you a fan of it? Or do you think that it's kind of just a solid to even mid-off season? Let us know in the comment section down below. And let's move on to the 76ers. Obviously, the big thing for them was re-signing James Harden to a 2-year extension. Via free agency, they got Daniel House, JaVale Queen, PJ Tucker, and they got DeAnthony Melton from a trade. They obviously lost Jordan and Danny Green via trades and a signing from DeAndre Jordan. 76ers, I think that there's still moves to be made, so I'm going to give them a mid-off season just because I think there's still some more moves to be made for them. I think that they could definitely do a lot more. The question is, what moves do they have left? Because right now, Daryl Morey is in the drawing board trying to think of, okay, we have all this money. What are we going to do with it? So I'm going mid.
I would put them as a good offseason. I would put them as a good offseason. And here's my reasoning. I think, one, the James Harden contract is a huge W, right? Huge win for them. Getting as much money off the books in terms of just his contract as they did. And realistically, I think this is the biggest thing, Bernie. And this is maybe where I'm a little bit irrational. I think we have to say that Daryl Morey he's the James Harden whisperer. Like, he really is, man. All the things that we wish to see from Harden for the last few years, like, I've seen all of those things from him so far this offseason. I've seen more videos of James Harden in the gym this offseason, last 5 years combined.
Yeah.
Seen him make sacrifices more than ever in his career, say the right things publicly. I think that's a huge win for this team. Just being able to get a guy like that culturally to buy into what you're trying to do is a really dramatic change of pace for him, and something that I think makes a difference in your locker room, right? But also, huge contract for PJ Tucker, but by all extent, like, PJ Tucker is going to help this team. It's a guy that can take pressure off Joel Embiid physically. He can really, bully people around. I always love PJ Tucker. I think long term, like we've said, that contract is really rough. Like, he's making money when he's 42 or 41 years old. Yeah. That's a lot. But not really what we're talking about necessarily, and they can always get off that when it comes time. Yeah. And one other person is DeAnthony Melton too. I actually think he brings a lot of benefits to this team with his perimeter defense, 3-point shooting. He's an upgrade to me from Danny Green, who was by all accounts super wishy-washy with the 76ers in his tenure. Like, he would have games where it's like, wow, this guy, like Danny Green, is ageless. He could still do the things that made him valuable with the Spurs back in the day. And then he'd have games where it looked like he was like J.R. Smith, like he would just forget what he was doing almost, you know? I like this offseason from them. I thought they were already a contender, maybe more than other people did. Like, I am not necessarily basing it so much on Harden, but more on, like, you have Embiid. You have this guy unstoppable. Like, Embiid might be Giannis, as close to unstoppable as it gets in the league right now. I would say anywhere between like 3 to 6 players in the league that you would classify as unstoppable at any given time. And Embiid is right there in the top 3. He's been the runner-up for the MVP, I think, 2 years in a row, I don't know. I think I'm just higher on their squad in general, and I don't think, again, They got rid of old vets that didn't bring much to the team, and they added in some younger guys who can help and made the team. And like you said, they're a move away with that extra space from Harden's contract. So I'm good. I'm going good on that one.
Okay, I'll meet you in the middle and go solid.
Let's do that. I like it.
All right, let's go to the Phoenix Suns.
Phoenix. Let me take this one, Bernie.
All right, you got it. This is all you.
Phoenix.
Oh, take the wheels.
Now, maybe we're going to get my hottest take of the day. Okay?
Uh-oh.
I think that this is a terrible offseason.
Worst offseason.
Bottom. Maybe not as bad as Charlotte. They're still technically championship contenders, but I would put this in close to worse. I would.
Wow.
And I'll even give myself a little devil's advocate here, right? Like they ended up getting Ayton on a better contract than what they would have if they had just given him the max, right? Mm-hmm. That ended up working out relatively okay. But you have to question what that locker room is going to be like, right? Because it ended really dramatically last season. They got absolutely hosed, washed, the definition of just rinsed by the Dallas Mavericks in that Game 7. I mean, that is one of the absolute soul-taking performances we've ever seen in the NBA. Now, I am one that always has to question what the carryover of something like that is, because people don't forget that kind of stuff in the NBA. Like that kind of stuff lingers, it holds on to teams, and it tarnishes a reputation. And I think I love Chris Paul, Bernie. You know this. I had Chris Paul's Hornets jersey back in the day. I've always been big on Chris Paul. I am genuinely concerned about this season for this team. I think that this is the biggest step back team in the league this year.
Damn.
Dropping the hammer on them. I was really unimpressed with Devin Booker, personally. And Chris Paul is about to be 38 years old on a really big contract. The Ayton chemistry situation is still a question. They have positives, right? Like I said, they got the Ayton contract relatively good. They extended Monty Williams. Those are wins. It's just I don't think they're any better than last season. And I think last year was that was a deal breaker, like a long-term limiter on how successful this team can be. I cannot see this team outperforming what they did last year. I can't do it. I can't see it.
Okay. I mean, I would say it's a very mid off season because, like you said, they bring back DeAndre Ayton, but there's still that beef between the head coach Monty Williams, who they just, like you said, extended his contract, and DeAndre Ayton. It's like, how does that chemistry work now? Because Monty Williams, when he was talking about it, said this is an internal problem and we'll deal with it. That to me is not something where it can be easily fixed with just a phone call. Like you have to build it over time. And so, like, from that perspective, I am not sure if Phoenix will go back to where they were a couple seasons ago, where they were the number one team in the West, battling it out and things like that. I think that this, like you said, is a huge game changer for the Phoenix Suns. And I would probably put them close to worst, just from the fact that you bring back Ayton, but you also bring back the drama between the two, the head coach and the head player. Or one of the head players. And like you said, I mean, Booker has kind of proven that he's just not a superstar. He is a star player. And so from that perspective, is he, you gave him the money. Nothing wrong with that. It's just now you're stuck with this team and you have Chris Paul obviously on some big money too. It's a tough sell to anybody to say like, hey, this team's going to be as good as they were last year. In the regular season, I just don't think that's going to be the case. I think that there's going to be too much drama, and the team's not going to look too hot.
Yeah, I mean, genuinely, I think that this is going to be the team we look at that had the biggest drop. In like 6 months from now, we're going to look and be like, wow, they fell off. And I'm not saying they're going to fall out of playoff contention completely.
Yeah.
It's just, we've talked about Devin Booker a lot too. I've always been pretty low on Devin Booker, relatively speaking, to the general consensus. I just don't think people understand how much a difference Chris Paul having like a season off, basically, or like a relatively easy season with the Thunder a few seasons ago, coming into the situation in Phoenix, kind of rejuvenated. I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think he's still there. And I think that Chris Paul made this whole situation work to the level that it did. And if he takes any step back physically, I think we're going to be looking at this as one of my better calls because I don't think Devin Booker is that guy. I don't think he's a leader, really.
He's just not that guy, pal.
Just not. And I don't. And Ayton, I mean, you have to question. We questioned what the chemistry between him and the coach is going to be. What's the chemistry between him and Chris Paul going to be like?
Yeah.
You know, by all accounts, Chris Paul has stuck his neck out for DeAndre Ayton many times. You know, basically taking him under his wing for, lack of a better way to say it. Like, probably was not happy with that situation just as much as Monty was. Like, I bet him and Monty Williams were on the same page with the Ayton situation. So, only caveat, last thing for Phoenix, the only caveat is, let's say in like 2 months, the NBA comes out and whoever it is, they announce that Sarver is no longer going to be the owner of the Suns. They're selling the Suns. I think that that's a huge W for the team. Enough so long-term that I would actually consider changing how I feel about them coming into the season. But for now, I think this is one of the worst off seasons.
All right, one of the worst off seasons. Let us know in the comment section down below. Do you agree with Pete? Is this one of the worst off seasons for the big teams? Again, we're going with spicy takes, so let us know in the comment section down below. All right, time to move on to the Portland Trail Blazers. This one, they got a couple players. They got via free agency, they got Gary Payton. Via the trade, they got Jeremy Grant. And via the draft, they got Pete's guy, Shaden Sharp. Jabari Walker, sorry to bring that up, but they also lost.
I'm still standing with him for now.
Eric Bledsoe and Joe Ingles lost in free agency. And so, for me, the Trailblazers had a very close to worst offseason. More so from the fact that not because they drafted these guys, but more so, what direction are they going in? Because to me, a year ago, we were thinking, okay, they're going to tank. They're looking to rebuild. Maybe they're trying to get the kid from 2023. Victor Wembanyama. Maybe they're trying to get one of those free agents, but instead they gave Lillard a max extension. They brought in Jeremy Grant, who again did a decent pickup. They brought Gary Payton II back to the home roots of Portland, Oregon, where he played college ball. I think the Portland Trailblazers are in no man's land right now. And that's the reason why I had to put them as one of my close to worst off seasons.
Yeah, I'm pretty close. There's a couple I think are worse than them for sure, but it's pretty bad. A couple other things you didn't mention. One, that contract extension they gave Dame is pretty crazy. He's going to be making $60+ million in the final 2 years of his contract. I mean, that's pretty crazy, I would say, for any player who's never won a championship, let alone he's almost 30 or he is 30. Mm-hmm. He might be 31, actually, now that I say that.
Yeah.
Look that up while I keep talking. Being said, it's exactly what you said, Bernie. I mean, the question is, what's the point? Where are they going? What are they actually trying to do? And realistically, like, the obvious answer is they're building around Dame, but Dame enough at this point in his career to make up for the holes that this team has. I like the Jeremy Grant trade in theory. I like the idea of putting a guy like him with Dame. And I believe they re-signed Nurkic to a decent contract as well.
Yep, they re-signed Nurkic. They got Anthony Simons on a good contract now. They got Keon Johnson, they got Jeremy Grant, they got Nasir Little. Again, this roster is not necessarily the worst roster I've ever seen.
That's not terrible.
But at the same time, like you said, like what direction are they going in? Are they thinking that this roster is good enough to compete for a playoff spot? Or do they think that this roster is decent enough to where they can kind of be just an average team? Because again, the Portland Trailblazers need to decide what their future is at this point. Do they want to rebuild and get another guy in, or are they satisfied with just, keeping Lillard until he's done with playing basketball?
And I would argue that I think they answered that this year. Like, to me, I think they answered where they're going, and they're going with what they have, right? They're not trying to blow it up because they wouldn't have extended Dame and they wouldn't have extended Anthony Simons, right?
Yeah.
And that contract is a question mark too, because he's like 22. He had half of a really good season last year. I mean, maybe the whole season was pretty good by most people's standards, but last year was the first time we really saw Anthony Simons do much after a lot of years of hearing about him. To give him 100 mil after that is a pretty big question mark. Like, to me,
Yeah.
that's one of the more mind blowing ones. Like, and this isn't just to go back to my Knicks and play Homer here, but like
Yeah.
people will question the Jalen Brunson contract all day, but they're not questioning this Anthony Simons one as much. And it's like, I get that he's a little younger, but I mean, it's not like he's shown much more than Jalen Brunson, realistically, he really hasn't. So I'm not saying I don't like that contract. It's more just, this season will dramatically depend on how good Dame is. And
Yeah.
I do think there's a universe, and this will be where I maybe make some Portland fans happy if they care at all. Like, I think there's a universe in which this is Dame's MVP season.
Yeah.
This year to be just the guy, go all out, and Portland overperforms everybody's expectations on the back of him completely. It could happen.
Yeah.
Like adding Gary Payton II too. We talked about him earlier with how big his contract was for the Warriors not to be able to sign him. He's a guy that's like, he brings a lot of good stuff to your squad. He's a winning player. He does the dirty work and he knows what it takes to win. So I don't think I'm as hard on them as you are, but it's definitely not a good offseason. And my guy, Shaden Sharp, I like Shaden Sharp. Long term, though, I don't think he's going to help very much this first season.
Yeah. So we'll find out in the future, like what this team is capable of. So let's move on to the next team. And again, let us know in the comment section down below. Portland Trailblazers fans, how are you feeling about your Trailblazers? Are you excited about your future, or are you in limbo? That's the biggest question mark to come from you guys that I want to know in the comment section down below. Segueing on to the San Antonio Spurs. Remember the Alamo. Remember how this team just got absolutely destroyed by losing a lot of good players. Losing DeJounte Murray was the big one. All-star player. You lost Jock Landale. You lost Lonnie Walker, the fourth to the Lakers. And then you drafted Jeremy Sokan, who I really like. You drafted Malachi Branham. Blake Wesley. Brought in Isaiah Robley. I know what they're trying to do. We all know what they're trying to do. They're trying to tank. This is not, this isn't something where you're like, okay, we don't know really what they're doing. But if I had to do it, it's probably one of the worst off seasons from this perspective, Pete. They got rid of one of their best players for draft picks for a team that will probably make the playoffs in the Atlanta Hawks. And again, they're betting and crap shooting that they are going to get the guy that they want in Victor Wembanyama in the draft this coming season. Because I don't think that there's any other reason why the San Antonio Spurs would get rid of so many good players. They have a lot more moves to make up as well. And so for me, they are one of the worst off seasons from that perspective.
I think this one is definitely not very good, but I'm a little higher on it than you are just because of where they were at, right? And I've told you my conspiracy theory. I don't know if we talked about that on stream, but the situation with DeJounte Murray, I think, is really fascinating, right? He definitely had a lot of love and respect for Pop, right? Like, we saw that. We saw that when Pop, I think, hit that milestone last season where he was... Is he the NBA's most all-time winning coach? Is that what he did?
Yeah, I think so.
And if you go back and look at that, like, there's a moment between him and DeJounte Murray where DeJounte Murray is like really emotional for Greg Popovich, right?
Mm-hmm.
That leads me to believe, and just like, I generally speaking, I like the Spurs. I really like Coach Pop. I do think he's the best coach in NBA history personally. And, that leads me to watch the Spurs on occasion. I really think that there was a situation brewing in San Antonio where DeJounte Murray, rather than, come out, a lot of teams do, where the player is really unhappy and wants to leave, I think they decided mutually it was the right choice to make. Because I get what you're saying. Like, getting rid of DeJounte Murray on paper is a really bad choice. He's a player that only gets better. He's young. He has a ton of skills. He was basically averaging a triple-double most of last season efficiently, not in a Westbrook type of way, right? They got a lot back for him. Like, getting 3 firsts back can't be mad at that. I really don't think. Like, I think the 5 basically for Gobert has really changed people's expectations, but that's a big return in most trade situations in the NBA. I don't think they were going anywhere with what they were doing. And they, to be fair, they got a really good contract extension out of Keldon Johnson too. I think it was 4 for 60 or 4 for 80 rather.
4 for 80, yeah.
It's a really good contract for a player like Keldon Johnson. And intention, which by all accounts it is to tank. This team has a pretty wonderful track record of not tanking, and when they are bad, ending up with the guy they wanted anyway. Look at Tim Duncan, right?
Yeah.
This is one of those situations where I think that throwing this season was the right choice. They weren't going to be good, even if they kept DeJounte Murray or Lonnie Walker, any of those guys. They were one of the worst teams in the West already. So making the choice they did, getting really young, getting Jeremy Sohan, getting Malachi Branham and Blake Wesley, those are good players to get in the first round. Those guys are really solid offensively, and Jeremy Sohan is just good all around, I think. So I like this team, and I like their potential to end up with somebody they're really happy with, because we need to do this again later soon to talk about prospects for this next draft. It's not just Wembanyama. There's like 4 dudes I think that are game-changing prospects in this next draft. Being anywhere in that range to get one of those guys is a good thing to do. So I don't hate it, but it's not a good offseason.
So you go close to worst?
Fully, I think.
Mid?
Let's go close to worst. Let's put mid. Let's put bottom of mid. I think it's bottom.
Mid. Okay.
What their expectations were, right? Like, what would you have thought it was much better if they kept DeJounte Murray and ran it back with this team? I would have said they're terrible anyway.
Yeah. That's fair. That's a fair point. I would probably go close to worst, but I think mid. We can leave them at bottom of mid and just kind of call it good there for the Spurs. Again, Spurs fans, let us know what your opinions are in the comment section down below. Are you guys a huge fan of the San Antonio Spurs? Do you think the Spurs are looking to tank for Victor Wembanyama, or do you think that this is part of Popovich's plan? Because we know Popovich doesn't have a lot of time left in terms of coaching. I know he wants to retire sometime soon. And so the question mark and again, maybe he's lying about that, right? Because I think for him, I think he's a workaholic. He's probably one of those guys that probably never wants to retire. But, at some point you do have to retire at some point. So let us know in the comment section down below about the Spurs. And then there were 3 teams left. Let's go with the Toronto Raptors next. They brought in Otto Porter Jr., DJ Wilson. They got Christian Coloco, who I really like from Arizona out of this draft. Too. I'm going to say that this was a very solid offseason for them. Because the fact that you brought in, again, 2 guys, I will continue to roast Otto Porter Jr. for that contract in Washington.
It was terrible. Not his fault, though.
Yeah, not his fault. Hey, take your money. I'm never going to hate on that.
Exactly.
Otto Porter Jr., bringing him in as a shooter, that's great. DJ Wilson, good player. Coloco, going to be a huge rebounding opportunist down below for them, and crash the boards both offensive and defensive. And so I am excited about that pickup for them. And so I'm gonna go, like I said, I went with I went mid. No, I went solid. I went solid with it, and I'm gonna keep my word to it. They didn't lose anybody very big, and I think they're keeping those guys that they want. And so for me, I'm gonna go with a good, I'm gonna go with solid offseason.
I would say mid probably for me, but I can't really argue. I can't argue solid either, just because like they're another team, right? In the same place of what are their expectations really, right? Like best 2 players are really meshed in age necessarily with your up and coming best player in Scotty Barnes. Like they're kind of at a crossroads with what they're gonna do, and I think that's why we keep hearing them in every single trade rumor that comes around with every big player. Like that is this team, the definition of this team. They're in a limbo spot where they have a guy like, what's his name? Oh my gosh, I'm totally forgetting. You got Van Vliet and what's the other guy? Pascal Siakam, excuse me.
Scotty Barnes.
Didn't necessarily mesh up really well with what Scotty Barnes is long term. I think the one thing, and this is a big boost for me, I think them being so bullish on Scotty Barnes and keeping him in any trade as an untouchable player. Okay, perfect. He's the only player on your team that should be untouchable. Everybody else, as much as you love Van Vliet, as much as you got to love Pascal Siakam, he was so much better last season too, Siakam, compared to the 2021 season. those guys are expendable, realistically. They really are. And it really depends on what you're doing with Scotty Barnes long term. I would say, like, one of the very few teams that I would say if they went and traded the whole farm for Kevin Durant and had Scotty Barnes, say they keep Scotty Barnes, they trade some combo of Van Vliet and Siakam with picks or whatever it is, right? How much an L can be an L for getting a player of Kevin Durant's caliber. This team just doesn't need a player like Kevin Durant because what does that do for them? You know, they're not a championship team any more than Brooklyn is if they added him. So
yeah,
I like this offseason in terms of they didn't need to do much because they didn't have much that needed to be done. Like, that's a goofy sentence, but didn't have much they could do anyway, so don't force anything and rush anything is kind of where I'm coming from. So I like it. I'd say solid, but I'm fine with either way. Yeah. I would say mid, but I'm fine with solid.
All right, we'll leave them at solid then. Or actually, yeah, we'll leave them. Well, let's leave them at mid. We'll go kind of go.
Let's do mid.
We'll go a little bit higher than the Rockets, but we'll go next to the Nuggets. All right, let's move on. Let's do the Washington Wizards, and then we'll leave the Jazz for last because I feel like we got a little bit more to talk about them. So the Wizards didn't really do too much this offseason.
It's a terrible offseason.
Brought in Taj Gibson, brought in DeLon Wright. They got Will Barton, Monty Morris, and then via the draft, they got Yannick Enoza, Johnny Davis, and then they lost Thomas Bryant, KCP, Raul Neto, Ish Smith. This, to me, when I look at it, it's a very close to worst offseason, just from the fact that they are still bringing in so many guys that fill the same positions of the same players each and every year. Guys like Rui Hachimura, guys like Johnny Davis. Again, I like Johnny Davis, but he's going to get clogged in the jam that is these players. I mean, let's look at the Wizards roster. And Sean, shout out to you, Sean, for continuing to watch. I appreciate you. You got Johnny Davis. You got Rui Hachimura. You got Corey Kispert, Kyle Kuzma. Like, all those guys are the same players in terms of playing the same positions. You don't know what to do with them. And I think this has to be a breakout year for Rui in order to like really solidify himself as a player that they need, or maybe gets traded. They have Kristaps Porzingis, who I'm not a huge fan of. I don't know anymore, Pete. The Wizards are a confusing team. I don't know what direction they're going in. They re-signed Bradley Beal to a huge contract again, where people thought he was going to go. I don't even know what to say about this team anymore, other than there's such a logjam of guards that just doesn't make any sense, the moves in the direction that they're trying to go. And it seems like they will continue to be stuck in this limbo for years to come.
I am very tempted to say that this is the worst offseason. Like, this is like really close for me to Charlotte for different reasons, obviously. But I think that this is one of the worst ones. Like, let's start with the big one, right? I think the elephant in the room is Bradley Beal and his contract.
Yeah.
Like, to me, that is the worst contract extension signing of the season, of this offseason. Like, whatever you think of Bradley Beal, anybody listening, watching this later on right now currently, Bradley Beal is not as good as the contract he just received is. And I don't really care what anybody has to say about it. Like, I watch enough of this sport to know deep down that Bradley Beal is not a number one player on a winning team. Just is not. Historically, that type of player at the level that he is does not lead to winning championships. It never has. And in his best season that he's ever had, which was 2 seasons ago, he was the scoring leader for the league. I think he scored like 30.2 points per game or something like that. Even then it was ugly. That team was like the worst team in the league that season. So people get so caught up on stat lines nowadays. One of the very few examples, I would say, Bernie, of you have a guy that's an all-NBA player, and people would always say, oh, you have to re-sign that guy. Whether or not you like it, you have to do it. I would argue you didn't have to do it. You probably shouldn't have done it. Now, first, you're stuck with him. Like, a perfect example, like a perfect world, he asks for a trade in 6 months, has the best first half of the season he's ever had, and they get a huge package in return for him. That's the best result of this situation they've put themselves in. I just don't think that's going to happen, man. I
Yeah.
just don't. Now, think of the teams that have always been rumored to be in these trades for Beal. The Celtics are not trading for Bradley Beal on that contract. I don't think they are. I
No.
would be astounded by that. I just don't think they're a dumb enough team to trade for that contract. And if they're not in the situation between him and Tatum and all the rumors for years, I mean, who's in for Beal with that
No.
contract?
No one.
Nobody. So now you're stuck with a 50 plus million a year guy who doesn't raise your ceiling at all past what it is. So I would put this as the second worst offseason currently, right ahead of Charlotte in terms of second to worst, and right behind Brooklyn in terms of Brooklyn could be much worse, and they're terrible, but at least they have Kevin Durant and Kyrie still signed to their team. This team's terrible, and Johnny Davis looked atrocious in summer league, and I don't think that means a lot. Like long term, if Johnny Davis is good, he's going to be good. If he's bad, he's going to be bad. The league is not indicative most of the time of that, but he was really bad in a summer league to the point where you have to be a little bit concerned. So I hated this offseason on all accounts. I think they're terrible.
Yeah, definitely was not a great offseason. Let us know, Wizards fans, what do you think about it? Is it one of the worst off seasons in the NBA? Let us know in the comment section down below. I think it's a little better than
Bradley Beal got the Kyler Murray contract of NBA basketball.
He did. All right, let's move on to the last team, the Utah Jazz. They obviously are in the news for big reasons. Obviously they got Simeone Fontecchio. I think he's Italian. He's an Italian. They got Malik Beasley. They got Patrick Beverley. They got Leandro Bolmaro. They got Jared Vanderbilt via the draft. They got Kessler. They lost Rudy Gobert to a trade. Hancho Hernan Gomez, the actor himself, I believe he's on a different team. I'm not sure what team he's on now.
Just signed to a team today. Who was it? Here, I'll find it while you keep talking.
He signed to a team. You got Daniel House Jr., who they lost, and Royce O'Neal, who they traded away to the Nets. This, to me, I mean, if I want to troll, I'd probably say that this was a championship offseason, just because they've got rid of players. But I would say that this is a good offseason, more so from the fact that maybe I'm changing definitions of teams and things like that. This was a good offseason from the fact that, actually, you know what? No, I can't do that. It is probably a solid offseason, just from the fact that they got rid of Rudy Gobert and got a huge buttload in return. You have to like that as a Jazz fan. Again, the Jazz are never going to attract free agents. I don't care if Dwayne Wade is the owner. I don't even care if LeBron James himself is the owner of the Utah Jazz. He owns them just by playing the game that he does. I think the Utah Jazz, they need to build from the draft, and they're probably going to do it the right way. Try to get this kid, Victor Wembanyama. I keep bringing his name up. Again, we will have something coming out relatively soon about him. Like I said, in week 1 or week 2 in August. So be on the lookout for that. But again, I thought, to me, the Utah Jazz, it was solid just by getting rid of guys and really blowing this team up and starting over fresh.
Juancho signed for the Raptors today.
That's what it was. Nice. The Six.
I'm going to push back on what you just said. I actually think you were in the right spot originally. Maybe not the championship troll, but I think it was a good. I think this is a really good offseason.
Okay.
Yeah, I really do.
I'll move it up for you.
Here's the thing. Realistically, there's no way they could have brought back the team they had last season. There's just literally no chance they could have done that. There was no positive that could have been gleamed from bringing Donovan Mitchell and Rudy Gobert back.
Mm-hmm.
This is where it starts to get good, right? Who got the biggest return of all time? Is it bigger than the Anthony Davis trade? Was it bigger on paper? Because I would argue that the Pelicans got better stuff in return. But just on like an asset to asset, how much was returned for Rudy Gobert? I think it was more, right?
Yeah, I think so.
Gobert is not worth as much as they got in return for him. So you have to give them a big plus right away.
Yeah.
I would be genuinely shocked if Donovan Mitchell plays a minute for this team next season. I'd be very, very, very surprised. If you add that into consideration, I mean, they're going to get another historic borderline return for him, right? Which puts them in the best position asset-wise in the whole league.
Yeah.
the Thunder, and I would argue that their situation is better than the Thunder because even the players that they got in return for Rudy, on top of all the picks, are worth things.
Yeah.
Beasley is worth something. Patrick Beverly is worth something. Jared Vanderbilt is probably worth a first to some teams in the league. I bet they get a first for him eventually. If they do that and they make all these moves, they run out this garbage team for one season, they can rebuild through the draft one season more than we've ever seen a team do. And I really think that seems to be what the plan is. Going into the draft that we're going to have next season, it's the best move to make. They had no chances to sign anybody that would make their team better. Donovan Mitchell doesn't raise your floor if he's alone. He really doesn't. He can't play defense like at the level you want him to do that. So, I mean, this is it's almost a bigger dub for Danny Ainge than anything else. Like he is, and I'm not going to be one of the guys that just thinks he's a god no matter what. Like I think I'm also not going to be one of the guys that says he ruins basketball. I think that he's just really good at his job. He's really good at getting value in return for the players that he can't keep on his team or doesn't want to keep on his team. When it comes down to it, no one is going to have a better chance to get Victor Wembanyama than this team. Nobody, as of this moment right now, has a better chance to get him. On paper, he is the best prospect since you want to come up with. Literally anybody you want to name. He's the best prospect since them. I think everybody wants to say, like, people will put out the headline or whatever our video is going to be called, whatever it is. It's always the best prospect since Zion, since LeBron, since Kevin Durant, whatever it is, right? This is one of the very few situations, I would argue, where all of it is justified. I mean, Victor Wembanyama is a freak. If you position yourself as a squad to end up with that guy, and you have no other hope to be a decent team anyways, I say you're doing the right thing. That's just me. And I think anybody's doing a better job of it right now than Utah. So I would say this is a big win for them. I think they've had a great offseason.
Yeah, for sure. And let us know in the comment section down below, what did you guys make of our tier list? Are you guys in agreement? Do you disagree? Let us know in the comment section down below. Again, I do appreciate Pete. I know I'm on borrowed time right here, so I do appreciate you tuning in, and Pete for helping out on this channel and helping finish this list.
Brother, man. Pleasure.
But he does have to go, and so I will respect his time at that sense. So again, I do appreciate you guys for tuning into the channel. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. Again, we're on the road to 2K. Let us know, leave your comments and opinions in the comment section down below. I will also be breaking down each individual team. Be on the lookout for that this coming week. We'll break them down, talk about the teams probably from the order that we just did it, from the first team that we did to the last team. So make sure you guys are paying attention to when your team will come up. But nevertheless, thank you once again for tuning here to The Charge, bringing the latest NBA news and rumors and also basketball opinions. Please remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button if you're new to the channel. And again, we'll catch you guys on the next video. Unless, Pete, you got something else to say?
Good, man. I appreciate you guys. Thank you for tuning in. See you next time.
All right, everybody.